Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 101. Somewhere else. Debris flying around, wall breaking apart. Everything gave way before the projectile shaped like a male fairy with a light beard and a battered crown on his balding head. Following the first projectile was a second. It was shaped like a female fairy with platinum blonde hair. "How dare you!" the second projectile roared as it hit the first, giving it another boost. "Please understand, sweetie. You are also not the youngest Mug." A fist dug into the first projectile's guts and it shot away, shaped like a banana with a spray of blood. "I'm barely over 200, you millennia-old geezer." Finn was having a friendly discussion among family members. It was not a brutal rampage, demolishing their palace in the process. "But sweetie," Finn's father said with blood flowing from his mouth. "No. No, sweetie. You send me a message that grandma was sick. I come here. I get forced into all kinds of hero parades and nobody tells me what is going on. And when I finally meet grandma, she congratulates me on getting married. 2 weeks. 2 weeks she could have spent with Seth to explore Aura were wasted. She had endured a parade, an award ceremony, a promotion, and several banquets in these tight and uncomfortable formal dresses. She didn't even get to meet the people Seth and she had saved. Her supposedly sick grandmother congratulating her on the arranged marriage, after she finally managed to meet her, was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Flames were spewing from her eyes and an intense divine aura covered her fists. The first projectile Finn's father came to a stop lying on a great balcony of the palace. "Honey, please let me." Like a not-so-jolly green giant, she smashed both her fists into the balcony, breaking the whole structure and cause a rain of debris. After smoke and dust were dispersed by a strong gust, she found her father desperately clinging to the ragged edge. He looked up to her with pleading eyes. But his gaze only met black eyes, deep and cold like the void. "Long live the king!" She stepped on his hand and kicked it off the edge. Her father fell and vanished in the dust clouds below. "Are you done with your little temper tantrum?" A beautiful fairy hovered in the air beside the hole in the facade. She had the same eyes and hair color as Finn. Actually, it was the other way around, as this fairy was her mother. "Mom! How could you let this happen? You hail me as a hero and then you let him stab me in the back." "Sweetie-appy. I am sorry. I had no choice." With teary eyes her father flew back up out of the dust cloud. He had played along to appease her anger, he was not really in danger at any point. He just endured the pain. Finn ignored him resolutely and turned towards her mom. "It's true, honey. It's the second prince that asked for your hand in marriage. It's also him that forced the parade and prizes. Even so, the fairy race was a matriarchal society with a queen above all, there were still all kinds of lower kings and nobles below her reign. Finn's family were mid-level nobility in their country. Her father had not the power to go against the royalty." The cracking of tense tendons filled the room as the grip of Finn's clenched fist became tighter and tighter. "Stop it. You know that you can solve this with brute force." It was the firm voice of her mother. She noticed her parents' worrying faces and loosened her grip. They were right. She stood no chance against the royal guards. She would not even be able to go on a rampage and destroy something before getting apprehended. "Suggestions," she pressed out. It was clear for her that she would not be forced into a marriage with some power-hungry royal who thought her achievements looked good on him. "Run," her mom simply stated. "Leave and ignore all summon. Didn't you say you got a good friend? Use some excuse to return to him." Her father looked flabbergasted at his wife. "But what about the prince? We did what was expected. If our daughter runs away, it's not our problem. She's 204. That's old enough to make her own decisions." Finn looked at her mother with sparkling eyes and gave her an enthusiastic hug. She always understood her. They talked about how they would smuggle Finn away. She would leave the world with the excuse of wishing to bid Seth goodbye once and for all. But she would simply stay with him and not return. It was a simple idea. As long as Finn managed to leave the world, there was nothing a prince could do to a high-ranking officer like Finn. She sent Seth a letter, that she would return soon and got excited about their meeting. She requested a leave from her superiors who were unable to deny a celebrated hero's request. At least the title was useful for something. Like this she ran off to Aura, leaving her parents behind to deal with the prince's anger. She successfully arrived in Aura's system church, but her letter had not been received. There was no Seth waiting here, so she went to look for Seth. She came to the inn, but there was no Seth. How was she supposed to find him now? Would she be able to find Seth in a big city like Aura? The fear of having come for naught grasped her heart. Just as tears tried to well up in her eyes, the innkeeper continued talking. He told her that he had left a few days ago together with his children and their party. He was away, taking the rank-up exam to become a B-rank adventurer. The exam was supposed to take 2 weeks. James, the innkeeper, remembered Finn and offered her to stay in his room until he returned. Finn needed a place to stay anyway, so she agreed to stay for now. Since she now knew where Seth was, her next destination was the guild to get more information about that quest. The guild was quite hectic when she arrived. The guild receptionists were running around with papers in their hands, while groups of adventurers were standing around with nervous expressions. The fairy waited for almost an hour at one of the counters before a receptionist finally got to her. She was sweaty and out of breath with her hair in disorder. How can I help you?" She tried to give her the trained business smile, but it was crooked and rushed. Finn felt a little bad for her but acted as if she didn't notice and told her about Seth. The receptionist lady's face twitched a little when she mentioned that her friend was part of the exam quest. "You didn't hear about it yet? You are a B-rank adventurer, right?" the lady suddenly asked with a glint in her eyes. "Yeah. Good, good. I can simply tell you about the specifics of that quest, but if you want to join the rescue reinforcement party, I can tell you everything." "Rescue party," she exclaimed. The receptionist signaled her to be quieter. She pushed a form towards. It was for joining the reinforcement quest. The receptionist gave her a short explanation of what was happening at the moment. Yesterday they got the notification from Tora to call back and cancel all merchant caravans and travelers. The wyverns along the road to the city had turned extremely violent. It had already been bad enough after a new alpha took over the lead of the flock, but something happened that Tora could not divulge, but it provoked the reptiles. The situation was volatile and extremely dangerous for any people traveling towards Tora. That was the reason for the chaos in the guild. Besides cancelling and calling back all kinds of traders, adventurers, and caravans, they also needed to organize a reinforcement party for the palace caravan that had already entered the wyverns' territory. The palace caravan was the last to enter the danger zone and had the greatest number of combatants. The quest required the participants to be at least B rank. This explained why the receptionist took this chance to immediately recruit her. B ranks were already rare and busy, finding one who was free and had a personal interest in taking part was like a heaven-sent gift. The complete briefing and set-off would happen tomorrow morning, so Finn had time to prepare. Wyverns. Finn thought about these big flying lizards on her way back to the inn. Although these creatures were extremely dangerous, she was also a little relieved. Even if it was dangerous, Seth should be at least strong enough to escape from those things. She was sure that he would manage to survive until she reached him. Chapter 102. The Exam, 4. All of them looked at the crippled wyvern. Limping, blinded, and with a broken wing it clearly lost its mobility. But it was still a massively armored tank. How were they supposed to kill it? Seth's first thought was Karen's obel. He was sure that the hammer would be able to smash even the wyvern's skull, but he had his sneaking suspicions about the hammer, which was why he excluded it from his considerations. As he was thinking, his attention wandered to the rest of the caravan. They had been having a hard time and no leeway to consider the overall situation. The fourth wyvern had also landed and the other parties were busy holding the reptiles back while securing the caravan's retreat. The other C-ranks had the same problems as Mike. Their weapons were unable to effectively penetrate the thick scales and deal enough damage to kill or incapacitate them. The escape happened slower than expected because of the problems, so their distance to the caravan had not grown as much as they had feared. The question was, what to do about the wyvern here? Should they just leave it behind and run? Seth came to the conclusion that he had no weapon that would help him end the wyvern in one shot. At least he was not sure to get out of melee combat unscathed. This left only one solution. Turn it into a hedgehog. He shared his opinion with the party. Let us just go all out with ranged attacks on it until it dies, he stated before equipping his bow and aiming for the cavities that once held wyvern eyes. The other looked at him astonished, but when his first arrows hit the creature's tongue with a spurt of blood, they understood his intention? Well, not really. They thought Seth was talking about aiming at the unarmored mouth and killing it that way. While Seth's intention was to literally just stick it with so many arrows that it will become tired of living. Hitting the tongue was actually him missing the eye. The outcome was the same. While Bilko, Lixus, and Puffles started battering the wyvern's head with attack magic, Mike brought out a bow and Mina a crossbow. The bow was a backup weapon for Mike, so he was not the best marksman. But Mina actually used the crossbow with poisoned bolts quite regularly. The wyvern was blind, so it could not even make out the direction of the people that peppered its head with a barrage of vicious long-range attacks. A good hit into the eye cavity by Seth massively slowed down the wyvern's movement. Did he hit the brain? Using this chance, Lixis prepared for a powerful spell. After a long cast, a regular-size fireball shot off her hands and entered the monster's throat. Seth already believed she had failed, when a massive explosion severed the creature's head from the inside. The long neck simply exploded in a splatter of blood. She looked at the rest of her party with a smug smile, as all of them had expressions of disappointment just a moment ago. Ding! Adult Wyvern Level 47 has been killed. You have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now Level 24. Ding! Title, Dragon Slayer, minuscule, gained. You have managed to subjugate a relative of the dragon race plus 5% on dragon-type enemies. What she had used was called a compressed fireball. It looked normal at first, but it was actually the power of many fireballs combined and compressed. How many came down to the talent and skill level of the mage. After a set time the compression would be lifted and the ball would explode with power several times higher than just all of its components combined. The sound of the explosion echoed through the whole landscape and pulled everyone's attention. Not just that of the adventurer, but also that of the wyverns. And not just the adventurers were flabbergasted seeing the bloody explosion and a messily decapitated head landing on the ground, following by the thump of the dead body going limp and falling over. All eyes turned to the party that had just killed a wyvern. Seeing the eyes of the adventurers, but especially those of the wyverns, he knew what would happen in a moment and started sprinting. Not away or towards the caravan, but towards the wyvern's corpse. It was not just the greed to make sure all the loot stayed with him and his party, no, it was also not the fear of not being able to loot it after the wyverns started their revenge. Well, maybe a little. But the biggest reason was the two orbs floating on the corpse. A giant glowing orb emerged from the severed neck and a smaller bright silver orb emerged from the head. One was the soul of the freshly killed wyvern. Soul, massive, crafting material, rare. The other was the loyal soul from his spear. It was most likely broken apart when the force of the explosion hit. The souls started gravitating towards him thanks to soul capture, so he just had to concentrate and reach the corpse, looting it and getting away. At the same time Seth started sprinting, the old wyvern also got on the move and descended from the high altitude from where it had observed until now. Seth saw the giant silhouette dropping from the sky in the corner of his eye. But he couldn't stop now. He was already so close, too close to turn around. He put more force into the sprint and took cover behind the wyvern corpse. Ding! Passive skill, Fear Resistance Level 8 has become Fear Resistance Level 9. A giant pair of talons zoomed past where he had just stood. Ding! Skill, Soul Capture Level 3 has become Soul Capture Level 4. The notification almost gave him a heart attack. He had looked forward so much to the level up of Soul Capture, but at this moment he could have gone without the jump scare. A whoosh! A crunch! The giant talons had dug into the corpse of the wyvern Seth was hiding behind. As if the old wyvern wanted to recover the corpse of its comrade, it started to flap its wing and lifted the corpse off the ground. No, you don't, he exclaimed and slapped the wyvern corpse, shouting loot. With a poof of smoke, the giant body vanished into thin air. The old wyvern suddenly lost control and shot off into the sky as the weight it had been grabbing vanished. Seth had no time to check the booty. Instead, he made a quick getaway, darting for the rest of the caravan. For the very peak of the caravan, to be specific, where the A rank and B rank parties were still observing the situation. The rest of his party had not just stood around watching him, they had actually already reached the caravan at this point. The situation was rapidly changing as the wyverns that had kept the other adventurers busy also took to the air. They circled and started focusing on Seth's party. Seth was glad that he had decided to buff his agility at least once. He dodged several dives as he caught up to his party and the caravan. The head. We have to get to the head of the caravan. Even if we fail the exam, at least we will survive. Everyone nodded and put all their energy into sprinting past the rest of the line of wagons and adventurers who were still stunned. It was a good thing the wyverns were out for revenge now, or these people would have been dead. The caravan had never stopped moving, but the party still managed to reach the front with the carriages of the examiners and proctors. The others slowed down at first but sped up again when they saw Seth actually zipping past the carriages. Would the stronger adventurers be of help? Maybe. But was even better than help? Safety. He had decided to directly run into the gorge, where the wyverns could not enter. Who cared about the caravan at this point? Nobody. Even the lizards ignored them, they were occupied with hunting him and his party. Mina and the rest followed Seth into the gorge. Surrounded by steep cliff walls at the bottom of this narrow chasm, they let out a sigh of relief. Followed by a scare when the wyverns landed at the edge of the gorge above them and kept trying to crawl into the tight space to kill them. Seth led the past the well-made entrance to the dwarven shelter and closer to the exit on the other side. The wyvern followed them like a pack of madmen with bloodshot eyes. Seth had only thought of their own safety when he led the party in here. But now he had a better idea. If we stay here, the wyvern will also stay here. While they are completely fixated on us, the caravan can get into safety. It's the perfect excuse, he explained to Mina and the others. The excuse really worked. While the beasts kept trying to kill them with their looks, the rest of their company was able to safely enter the checkpoint. After the last cart, not the one crushed by the wyvern, entered the cave, they also followed it into the safety of the dark cave. Chapter 103. The Checkpoint. In Aura. A company of 27 B-rank adventurers was ready to set off. There were 4 parties and 6 individual adventurers that had answered the call and took on the rescue mission. The one primary employer was not actually the city, but the Palace Merchant Guild. The cities of Tora and Aura were only the secondary sponsors of the quest. Leading the party was the old magician Venturi. He was the vice-guild master and former A-rank adventurer. Clad in a blue robe glinting with magic shields and formations, he had a straight posture and looked quite fit for his age. He skillfully mounted his horse like a young man. The whole party was lent special horses by the city lord. Not ordinary horses, but creatures especially bred for high-speed long-distance travel. They had little use in a fight but would enable the party to outrun the caravan and reach the wyvern territory within a day's time. Venturi briefly explained their task once again, before giving the signal to saddle up and set off. As Finn had not the physique to handle a horse, she sat on the vice-guild master's shoulder at the peak of the group. 1 day to reach the wyvern territory if nothing went wrong. Half a day to reach the caravan if they abided by their schedule. Seth, I am coming, she thought as the horses dashed off following the caravan. Checkpoint. They entered a giant hall that was carved into the massive rock cliff. A high ceiling was held by massive columns that were covered in artistic carvings. The magic lanterns situated on the walls like torches spend a soothing neutral light. In some places, the floor was worked smooth like tiles, but in most, it was worn by the constant stream of travelers and mounts that had entered this place to find refuge from weather and wyverns. Entering had felt like stepping through a membrane, as the entrance was actually sealed the entrance off against other monsters that lived in these mountains. The people of the caravan were not the only ones that had reached this place. Among the people, wagon, and animals from the caravan, Seth could also see some unfamiliar faces. Many eyes were directed at them and talking about them. Not all had seen them kill the wyverns, but soon everyone would know for sure. But he could also hear some snippets of talk among the people about the small group of peddlers that had arrived earlier than them. He had not much time, as one of the adventurers approached him and his party. They were called by the examiners and the caravan leader. The caravan leader, as the name implies, was the person tasked with the organization of everything within the caravan. Delays, damages, victims, it was his responsibility if anything went wrong. You really did it now, the 5 could hear an agitated voice from around the corner. They passed the wagon and saw the group of merchants with the leader in the front, arguing with the examiners and proctors. Now the wyverns want to leave us alone, no matter what. One of your parties actually killed one of them. The caravan leader was a fit older man. He had a handlebar mustache and looked more like an adventurer than a merchant, with his muscles and leather attire. On the other hand, was the solemn leader of the A-rank party who only silently watched the caravan leader let off some steam. Ah! There you are, he said after noticing their arrival. He walked up to them and ignored the seething man behind him. You did well. Slaying a wyvern is no easy task even for a B-rank party, he acknowledged their accomplishment. We barely got away with our lives. Mike answered embarrassedly. That you did. Although your actions were commendable, they were not the smartest. Killing it was already not the brightest move. It was a great provocation. But looting the corpse when the elder tried to retrieve it. Why did you have to loot it? The party's eyes unanimously turned towards Seth with a questioning look. He could not tell them that he had to get the souls. Why did he decide to loot the corpse? Greed? No. He was not blinded by simple worldly greed. That definitely wasn't it. It was something higher. A great cause even. It was the desire of a craftsman for high-quality material. Yes. So, it was greed. Definitely greed. Don't worry, I still like you. You were blinded. Greed. The whole party and the examiner unanimously agreed after he tried to explain to them his great cause. Yes. Seth acknowledged a little depressed. At least Mina was on his side, somewhat. Well, take it as a lesson and learn from it. At least you used the aggro for something productive instead of letting yourself get killed. You can leave now, the examiner said, and returned to the merchants. I called them here, why do you tell them to leave? And a lesson? The wyverns will target us from now on. We were upgraded from possible prey to enemies. Do you just want to excuse them? They have to take responsibility and let it go. It already happened and nothing will change that. I will take responsibility for this one. It's our responsibility, as it was us who underestimated the examinees and let it happen. The A rank held back the caravan leader. You are still here? Go already. He looked back and shooed them away. The party did not really understand why, but they got away scot-free and were even able to keep the spoils of war. They sneaked to a corner behind the wagons to take a look at the loot. Even Seth had had no time to check the items yet. It was not close to how much he had expected. Loot was a really inefficient method to harvest items. There were 35 of these scales the size of a palm, a piece of leather enough for maybe one armor, 4 fangs the length of his forearm, and a short horn. Seth was the only one among them who had the skill to appraise items, so he read the description to them. Wyvern scale, crafting material, rare. The scale of a wyvern. As a relative of the dragon race, their scales a high resistance against magic and physical attacks comparable to a lesser dragon's scale. Wyvern fang, crafting material, rare. Fang of a wyvern. As a relative of the dragon race, their fangs possess a high durability and penetrative attribute similar to those of a lesser dragon's fangs. Wyvern leather, crafting material, uncommon. The smooth leather of a wyvern's wings had a good elemental affinity with the wind. Wyvern horn, crafting material, uncommon. The horn of a wyvern. A short and brittle horn that reminds of a dragon's, but lacks the functionality. A good trophy to put on your wall. Their eyes showed when listening to the first two, the third was okay, and the last one was slightly disappointing. I don't know about the horn, but I know a good tailor. The leather could be rare, too. Seth assured them. After all, a smooth leather might be of greater use to a tailor instead of a blacksmith. So, how are we gonna split it? Mina asked into the group. Everyone looked towards Mike, the team leader. Mike in turn looked at Seth with a complicated look. They all knew that he was a fighting blacksmith. He had the biggest use for the materials, but they couldn't simply give it to him. Seth smiled, amused at Mike's expression. How about I store them for now? We visit the auction house for a neutral appraisal and I am going to pay you for the stuff I need. Deal. Mike looked relieved and everyone nodded in agreement. Whether they sold it to Seth or at a store, it was obvious who they preferred as long as the price was the same. Seth packed the items into his inventory and the party relaxed in their quiet little corner. They didn't dare mix into the rest of the caravan after pulling this much attention to them. The plan was for the caravan to stay here until the next morning. Hopefully, the wyverns were gone after a night. They sent Mina to get some warm food that was cooked and handed out in the middle of the hall. As the assassin, she was the most inconspicuous. Originally it was not planned to cook at any point on the journey, but after getting through such an attack, the caravan leader decided that warm food would lighten the mood. Mina came back with bowls of hot vegetable stew. After a warm meal, they wrapped themselves into warm blankets and fell asleep. Chapter 104. What they did not tell. Underscore 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 un. The floor started vibrating and Seth woke up. The hall was dark and the only light came from the burned-down campfires. What happened to the magic lanterns? He saw 2 glinting eyes beside him. Mina was also awake. A cat-type beastman assassin had an impressive perception. Mike was also awake. What's going on? Seth whispered to Mina. I have no idea. I woke up when the lights suddenly went off. Then the ground started vibrating and you woke up. They woke the rest of the party and equipped their items. Something was going on. Slowly the rest of the caravan got into motion as the vibration got stronger. But before people could cast light or ignite a torch, a massive rumbling filled the cave and pain-filled screams echoed in the darkness. In a panic, priests started casting light spells illuminating hideous beasts that had broken through the walls and floors of the hall. Elongated reptilian heads with terrible teeth strutting from their jaws and 2 empty pairs of eye sockets. The scaly skin was pale and desiccated. Drakes, some adventurer exclaimed hysterically. A drake was a relative of dragons like the wyverns. They had no wings but were terrible enemies on the ground. The things that had emerged looked similar but... No drakes, but what Kyaa? Before anyone could react appropriately, the creatures started a massacre. The long terrible claws kept ripping into the closest adventurers. Visible in the light, were more places where the walls and floor started to crumble away. "We have to get out," Mike said, and they sprinted out of the exit. They were not the only ones who thought of getting out. They passed the entrance just in time before it was blocked by the mass of people trying to get out all at once. All thoughts of formations or fighting had vanished as they tried to flee. Behind them, in the cave, the A and B rank parties were fighting the drake-like monsters. Before the people could all leave the cave, one of the creatures dived in the crowd, reaping blood and lives, causing even more chaos. Some who got out formed a formation outside the cave, but it broke down when the panic-stricken crowd rushed out. The examiners did their best, but there were simply too many monsters to stop them from chasing the fleeing people. The narrow space was filled with the screams of people, sounds of fighting, and the reptilian roars and screams of the beasts. Seth and his party stopped at the edge of the gorge and felt conflicted. They watched others just run past them, out into the night without looking back. It was not that easy for them. The blacksmith with night vision did not see any of the wyverns at the edges of the gorge, but it didn't mean that they were not there. Others might be able to just run out of the gorge, but they had killed one of the wyverns. The lizards might be waiting for them to come out and kill them the moment they left safety. There was no way they could fight that old wyvern. The screams behind them made them look back. Several of the monsters had finally squeezed through the entrance and out into the narrow gorge. Instead of chasing anyone, they started to voraciously devour the dead and incapacitated adventurers around them. More tried to squeeze past their preoccupied comrades from inside and gave chase after getting out. They waited close to the exit of the chasm, so they had some distance and time to evaluate their situation. Seth now finally found the chance to use observation on the creature, while they were occupied with feeding on the corpses of their victims and squeezing out from inside the cave. Blood slave, Drake, leave 37. Blood slave? Like those things in the dungeon. Seth thought when he read the name. How was this possible? And more importantly, if these were like the creature in the crypt, then they were far stronger than their displayed level suggested. As if it was not bad enough, that high-level drakes attacked. They were also some kind of buffed unholy creatures. "Let us run," Seth suddenly suggested. "Run? Why? We are easy prey for the wyverns out there, we might have a chance against. Try checking the stats of these things," Seth interrupted Mike. None of them had a more reliable appraisal skill than observation to check enemies, but since other members were at a higher level than Seth, they were able to see more than just the name. They were just used to jug by level and had not bothered to read much further before. When they took the time to check the stats of the drakes, their faces paled. A drake was already a beast that needed a C-rank party working together to kill it. These blood slaves had the status condition blood slave, which increased all their basic attributes by 50%, and enraged, which increased their attack by another 25%. With upset hissing and snarling, the mass of drake beasts pressed past their brethren occupied with the easy prey and started sprinting along the gorge towards both exits to give chase. "Yeah, we should run. Hurry," everyone agreed and slipped out of the gorge into the night. It had been a long time since Seth got to use concealment to hide his presence. Unlike the people before them, they were not in a total panic, so everyone activated some kind of skill to hide their presence and sneaked out into the night. Mina excelled as an assassin and completely vanished in the dark of the night. Seth could not even see her with night vision. As fast and as stealthy as they could, they gained distance to the gorge where now a steady stream of transformed drakes was flooding out from. Only Seth saw this and he refrained from telling the others. The party was tense hearing the herd of beasts running, trampling, and searching for more prey. They were better off not knowing how many beasts inhabited the darkness of the night. That was until the beasts also started to break out from the steep cliff they had been following until now, very close behind them at that. "Fuck. Hurry guys. They are closing in," he called out. There was no more time for stealth as they fell into a sprint to get away. What did it matter whether the wyvern noticed them, if they died to those weird drakes anyways? I found a place to hide. It's not far, a sudden voice made their hearts jump. It was Mina who had appeared among them. She had been scouting the area in front. She led them, following the foot of the cliff. Here. We have to climb. There is a crevice up there where we can hide, she said after stopping. This was better than nothing. Even if those creatures could tunnel through rock, maybe they would not find them up there. Outrunning them was not an option anyways. They hurriedly climbed up the steep rock wall. Just like Mina had said, there was a tiny ledge and a crevice where they could squeeze through. The tight entrance led to a short natural cave where they would be able to hide for now. Outside, the sound of the drakes galloping through the rocky valley changed. Instead of the thumping of the herd and the occasional screams, there were sounds of fighting. As if the drakes were fighting someone. Had the examiners finally managed to leave the cave and take control of the situation? Seth wanted to look outside, but Mina was a little faster. But she promptly jumped back into the cave when they heard a massive roar. One of the drakes had seen her and actually jumped the whole way up to the ledge. With its claws digging into the stone of the cave's floor, it was clinging to the ledge. Despite looking pale and gaunt from afar, the sinewy muscles and broad shoulders were still too wide to enter their little hidey hole. It snarled and hissed at them as it tried to squeeze it. Its hot humid breath reeking of decay filled cave and made Lixus feel nauseous. The two pairs of empty eye sockets still seemed to greedily look at the prey. After the initial surprise, Seth was the first to regain his composure. He swiftly used this chance and smacked the drake with Karen's obble. The mighty swing crushed the snout with a disgusting crunch and a splatter of coagulated blood and dark goo. It almost made Seth puke, but it had the desired effect. The creature was stunned for a moment, lost its hold, and fell off the ledge. This must have been how Finn had felt, covered in crock and mush. Seth already really missed his spear. With more range, he would not have been hit by a wave of icky stuff. No kill notification meant the thing was still alive. The party was still occupied with processing what Seth had just done when he added an unknown shield on top of the unknown weapon he had never used before. The shield was nothing special. Fitting to his armor, it was a medium-sized kite shield made of a wooden base covered with plates forged from several snake ribs. It was on the heavier side but had a good defense. Equipped with hammer and shield, Seth drew nearer to the entrance. He heard chaotic fighting noises from the outside, lots of reptilian roars and screams, but before he could get a glimpse, he had to block a smashed snout coming for his torso. It crushed into his shield and pushed him back. Seth swung his hammer again, aiming to crush the skull this time. And the drake vanished. No with a puff of smoke but with a yank. Screaming, with its claws digging into the floor, it was suddenly pulled back, away from the cave and up in the air. Chapter 105. What they did not say, 2. The scene before his eyes was as fantastic as could be. In the darkness of the night, only broken by the intermittent light of a spell, was brewing an epic battle. The valley had filled with an army of transformed drakes and the remnants of the caravan desperately fighting for their lives. And the air above the valley was filled with an uncountable number of wyverns. He could only see a mass of leathery wings covering the sky. Over and over, wyverns dived out of their flock to grab a drake and take it with them into the clouds and let them rain down or smash them into other drakes on the ground. While the drakes were attacking anything alive, the wyverns ignored the struggling adventurers and focused on decimating their undead relatives. Wow! It was Mina who had come beside him without him noticing. With her cat ears laid back and her eyes wide and dark, she looked at the battle in the valley. Was this how he looked when he set a whole city on fire? Ding! Blood slave, Drake, leave 35, has been killed. You have earned experience. The Drake had finally died somewhere on the battlefield. He got around 10% experience despite not playing a big part in its actual death. What's going on, guys? The rest of the party stuck their head out after they didn't say anything after some time. All they could see were the random flashes of light from magic. But they could hear the massive wings flapping in the sky and the cacophony of reptilian screams and roars. The shout of the adventurers, explosions of magic, and the meaty splashes when the drakes hit the ground from extreme heights. Just the noise of the battlefield was enough for them to pale. Seth explained what was happening, and they got even paler. What was even going on anymore? They talked about what to do now and came to the only possible solution. Cower and hide. Stay where they were until the situation outside calmed down. What else were they supposed to do? Help? That was nothing better than suicide. Run? There was a good chance to be picked off by either the wyverns or the drakes. At least they were safe from the wyverns here. And so, they entrenched themselves in the tiny cave and waited. Finn's side. The rescue/reinforcement party reached the wyverns' territory within a day's time and rested on the plateau where the caravan had stayed a day before. The traces the merchants had left assured them that they were close to catching up. The caravan would have reached the checkpoint by now. The party would have a good rest before rushing after them early in the morning. Like this, they would catch up to the caravan at dawn. Finn looked quiet on the outside, but she was actually on edge. It was not about the wyverns. Well, it was also about the wyverns. But what if what riled the wyverns up was more dangerous than the flying lizards? The fairy actually had to cast calm magic on herself to get a wink of sleep that night. She knew that she would have to be at her peak if she wanted to be of help in case something happened. The small cave. All of them were starting to get tired after not having the chance to sleep. They were all huddled together at the very back of the cave, looking at the entrance. The noise of battle had not waned, but sounds of people fighting, screaming, and magic being cast had long subsided. It was only the scratching of claws, the flapping of wings, and the reptilian roars and hisses left out there. It reminded Seth of a movie he had seen about a planet plunged in total darkness with hordes of bizarre monsters coming out to hunt. He felt a lot like he had become a character in such a movie. The darkness outside guaranteed the death of anyone entering it. He had no doubts about it. There was no second drake that tried to get in after the last one was snatched up by a wyvern, but they kept warily observing the entrance. They took turns between the guard and resting to conserve their energy. When morning came, the valley outside became quieter, but they still did not dare to leave the cave. Seth peeked out of the cave and found the valley covered in the corpses of the drakes and some humans. There were no wyverns, as they recovered their dead. There were still a lot of drakes and wyverns fighting, but it was incomparable to the number during the night. When the light of dawn fell over the edge of the cliff into the valley, the drakes fell into a panic. The living and the dead drakes started giving off black smoke as the sunlight hit them. The drakes stopped whatever they were doing and rushed towards the gorge, where they came from. The wyverns took their chance to pick off more of the panicking enemies. It was then they heard the sound of a battle rise once again. They could not make out what was said, but they hear strong and controlled shouts before projectiles and magic started pouring out from the gorge and hitting the rushing drakes. There are people. Seth woke the others. Once again, they assembled at the entrance and looked towards the fight. This time the adventurers' powers were coordinated and easily overwhelmed the wave of drakes. Their numbers were halved before even reaching the entrance to the gorge. Not counting those the wyverns picked off. The drakes that reached the adventurers met their end under the weapons of the frontline fighters. The difference between the previous night and this was like night and day. "We should go and help," Mike stated. Looking at the valley, there were few stragglers. Most of the drakes were trying to return to where they had come from. They could probably harvest some easy experience if they fell into the drakes' backs. It would also look better if they came out to help, compared to cowering in a cave to be rescued. They climbed down from their hiding place and were promptly involved in combat by a drake straggler who had been rushing towards the gorge. A single drake was no great problem for the party and they managed to overpower it quickly. The fact that it was melting in the sun helped, too. Mike beheaded the creature and Seth got 8% experience from it. If they could kill some more this easily, it would a good way to gain experience. They hurried towards the big group of drakes that scrambled to get into the gorge and the other holes where they had come from. Their numbers were already dwindling before the overpowering group of adventurers when Seth and the party attacked the blood slaves from behind. Fortunately, or not, the drake corpses rapidly dissolved in the sun, so there was no wall of corpses building up. Obviously, they did not simply jump into the fray. They started the fight with one of Lix's compressed fireballs as an opener. The ball exploded amidst the crowd. It burned and catapulted 5 or 6 drakes away from its impact point, leaving a big crater. They could only do it, since they had ample time to cast the spell beforehand. Mike, Mina, and Seth rushed in to finish off those in the worst condition. Ding! Blood Slave, Drake, Leave 36, has been killed. You have earned experience. Ding! Blood Slave, Drake, Leave 35, has been killed. You have earned experience. Ding! You have killed, Blood Slave, Drake, Leave 35, you have earned experience. Seth used this chance to verify his hunch. He watched the other two kill their targets and checked his experience bar. He gained 7% and 8% respectively for the two. He killed the last one with Karen's obel and it gave him less than half compared to the others. Seth had not much time to be happy about his discovery as they had to sprint back to their party. Otherwise, they would have been surrounded. The adventurers defending the gorge shot signal magic to show that they had noticed them, but they were not in a situation where they could help them. After the explosive opener, the party went back to orderly and stable party play to safely attack 1 or 2 drakes at a time. The sun had a tremendous weakening effect on them, giving the party a boost in confidence. Slow and steady they worked their way along the cliff and closer to the phalanx of frontline fighters at the gorge. Everything went great. Soon they would reach the reinforcement party. Until a blood-curdling roar echoed in the sky. Chapter 106. What they did not say. 3. In their battle against the blood slaves they had forgotten their primary enemy, the wyverns. The wyverns also started diving into the remaining herd of drakes, but not just the drakes. Seth and his party had forgotten someone important. The giant claws of the old wyvern barely missed Mike, who was blocking a drake. The grudge had not been forgotten. The old one and his 3 friends had noticed the party and focused on them. This was the worst situation possible. They were still some distance away from the others and could not easily run because of the drakes. Every time Seth or Mike were locked in battle, they would dive for them. Lexus was busy using low-level magic with short casts at the wyverns to deter its attacks. While Bulko kept using shields and the help of the pets to defend him and Lexus from the lizards in the sky and on the ground. As the one who had looted the wyvern earlier, Seth had the old wyvern's full attention and kept dodging and weaving between the drakes to evade the big lizard's vicious attacks. He successfully evaded several attacks. Then fortune left him and he stumbled over a corpse on the ground. Immediately a tremendous pressure clamped down on his shoulder. One of the zombie drakes had bitten into his shoulder. He heard the bone plates breaking. A terrible pain shot through his shoulders as he felt his bones breaking. Only the golden jacket stopped the teeth from sinking into his flesh. Seth was fixed in place and the old wyvern instantly saw its chance. Like a hawk, it dove down with incredible speed and its attack seemed inevitable. The giant maws of the beast were rapidly coming closer when a projectile shot from the adventurers at the gorge. The force of the projectile smashing into the beast's skull threw around its head. The old wyvern almost made a U-turn in midair before crashing into the ground. The next moment the projectile crashed into the drake, releasing his shoulder. "Seth! Are you okay?" a high-pitched voice screamed into his ears. It was Finn. The tiny fairy was back. Surprise and joy filled his heart and struggled with the fear and graveness of the situation. And she was not simply back, she had come to save him again. Seth had no words and could only nod erratically. His joy was short-lived as the old wyvern was only stunned for a short time. It was already getting back on its feet and ready to attack. Finn gifted him a happy smile before charging at the wyvern. Seth heard an enraged growl from behind him. The blood slave was not dead yet and it was very angry after waking up. Its giant claw pinned him down and the dented snout was aiming for his face. The next moment a dagger sank into the head of the drake that had him pinned and broke off. The beast let go of his shoulder with a dying cry. His angels had come to save Charles Seth. Mina had backstabbed the drake and ended its life with a critical hit that broke her dagger. Finn was zipping around the wyvern's head, kiting its attention away from Seth. Mina supported Seth and they ran back to the center of their party. The tanky pets came forth to secure their retreat as a giant tooth shot past the blacksmith and the assassin and struck the ground beside them. The fairy was simply too fast for the wyvern and kept pummeling its head. The hard scales could resist the blunt trauma the tiny fists dealt at high speeds. Bulko hurried to cast a shield surrounding the party once they joined the back rows. It was one of Finn's savage hits that broke the teeth and sent them like projectiles into the surrounding. More important than the pure damage she caused to the wyvern, were the status effects like stun and confusion she kept layering on the old wyvern. The wyvern had no chance to pursue anyone as it was busy enough to escape Finn's merciless beating. After Finn had rushed over, they got finally cover fire from the ranged attackers among the adventurers. They kept the wyverns at bay so Mike could also return into the circle of the party. With Mike and the pets forming their front line against the drakes, Bulko was able to take a breather and look after Seth's shoulder injury. One had to say, that the healing arts of a priest were far above modern medicine when it came to such injuries. Bulko's giant hands brought his broken bones in roughly the correct position and cast a medium heal. The magic took care of setting his broken bones and growing them back together within seconds. In exchange for such speed, this magic took a huge toll on Bulko's mana and mental strength, making the giant sweat and pant laboriously. Seth thanked him and handed him a mana, and a stamina potion to get back into shape. While they held their position among the group of drakes, the old wyvern finally managed to flee from Finn's tiny fists of fury. With a bruised and battered face, it took back to the skies and his among the clouds. After the wyvern had left, the fairy joined the party. There was no time to explain or introduce each other, but everyone understood that she knew Seth and was here to help. With Finn's support, they finally managed to make their way toward the front lines of the rescue party. "Ha! So, you people managed to survive till the end," was the greetings they got after getting past the front lines. The gorge was filled with half-dissolved bodies of drakes and a group of adventurers and merchants sitting here and there. The person greeting them was the leader of the A-rank party. There were also the proctors from the two B-rank parties. Compared to the A-rankers, their equipment looked quite worn and torn from fighting the hordes of drakes all night long. The examiners had defended the merchants in the back, which was the only reason they were still alive. "We were lucky," Mike said self-depreciatingly and plopped down on the ground, leaning against the stone wall. All tension had left their bodies after finally reaching safety. They were all very tired after a stressful night and the recent fight. The expression on the A-rank's faces was not much better than theirs. They had an even rougher night than them. "Don't belittle yourself. Being able to survive in such a situation needs more than luck. Let us hope we can find some others once the danger is dealt with." Finn and Seth exchanged looks and wanted to talk, but the fairy was called and had to return to the rescue party to help deal with the danger. The party sat down together with the merchants and examiners and they shared their knowledge of the previous night. The A and B ranks had spent all night fighting the drakes that kept pouring out of the bowels of the mountains. They had protected the merchants of the caravan as much as they could, still only about half of them were still left. Among the survivors was the head of the caravan. He had already been healed, but his armor was scrapped and he was still covered in blood. He was hugging a severely damaged greatsword. So that was his weapon. The merchants looked dirty, sweaty, and worn out, but they obviously did not fight at all. On the other side, they had no idea about the war between the drakes and the wyverns that had raged all night long. This was information that made not just the examiners listen attentively. A man with a long beard and a fascinating robe stepped up to them. "Can you tell me more about that battle?" "Ah, I am sorry for my discourtesy. I am Venturi, the vice-guild master of Aura." He had a sparkle in his eyes as if he had understood something. As they recounted what they had seen last night, the old man kept nodding. Seth could almost hear the gears clicking into the right places and working in his head. "Oh yeah. I might have another interesting piece of information in that regard. I don't know how serious the guild took my report, but I met something like these blood slaves before," Seth mentioned. And thus, what had happened in the dungeon on the graveyard directly to the guild master. "HOH. This is really interesting. The information itself might not be important, but in connection with what we are seeing here it might be a crucial part in solving this mystery." The old mage did not tell them any conclusion he came to. He excused himself and returned to the party of B-ranks that were finally wiping out the last remnants of the horde. They didn't look any better than the examiners who had fought all night when they joined the survivors at the campfire they had made. Not only was everyone tired, but the motivation had also taken a dive when they found out that the drake corpses could not be looted. Most of the corpses had already dissolved and those freshly killed bodies were already so damaged that loot didn't give any items. Venturi sent 2 parties to look for survivors of the examinees and 1 to guard the gorge. Looking at the examiners and Seth's party, he stepped towards the campfire. "It seems like you are all the fighting power left of the caravan. It's a shame. We had hoped to stock up on manpower on the way, and not tire ourselves this early," he said and began to explain the reinforcement quest and recounted what had happened in Aura. "Will you join us and travel the rest of the way to Tora, or would you rather turn around?" Chapter 107. Additional income. Seth and Finn were exchanging glances as he listened to the Vice-Guild Master's explanation. The first answer didn't come from the people of the caravan, but one of the adventurers who had fought until recently. "Vice Master, are you sure we are fit to continue this quest? We managed to fight without casualties, but all our equipment is heavily damaged after just this fight. The remains of the caravan also don't look that fresh anymore. Some might even be a burden and slow us down." The man gave the merchants a side glance. Venturi looked at the adventurer. "It is our quest to collect and protect all travelers on their way to Tora. Not to simply reach Tora. If you don't like it you can leave. It's 2 days to get out of the Wyvern territory on foot. And another 5 to get back to Aura. I won't stop anyone who wishes to leave." The man shrunk back a little, but everyone had the same concerns. The quest didn't give enough money to pay for their items if they really broke. Everyone here had to ponder about the pros and cons of continuing on this path. Seth sighed. I am a blacksmith. I could repair your items before we continue, he announced with a heavy heart. This was a big sacrifice from his side. Why? Once he summoned the soul smithy here, it would vanish back in his workshop and Cerberus would either stop working or outright despawn without the necessary number of crafting stations. It meant he lost a week's worth of scales Cerberus could have produced. But as he was in the position to be able to help, he felt obligated to step forward. It was surely not because it was a good chance to get into the good books of a bunch of B ranks. The exam already went haywire, so if he didn't get the B rank himself they might be of help. And even if everything worked out, being known to your future clients was never hurt. You are a blacksmith? Venturi and the A rank leader asked in sync. While the leader was a little shocked, the vice master was positively surprised. The people of the rescue party looked skeptical at Seth, who suddenly revealed himself to be a blacksmith. Are you really a blacksmith? Why should we trust you with our items? It was the same guy who suggested leaving the merchants behind. Seth is a great blacksmith. It was the high-pitched voice of a little fairy who was violently threatening the guy with her fists. Well, I really don't mind not helping you. It's actually less of a hassle for me. Seth shrugged and signaled Finn to calm down. Now. Everyone, please calm down. Young friend, would you be willing to show us your skill? I don't really want to show you. It's kind of a secret. You could just give me a damaged item and I will go over there into the cave and repair it. I am confident to be able to repair anything below epic rating. There was a short silence, but finally, one of the proctors of the exam stepped forward and handed Seth a set of armor parts that were covered in breaks and cuts from claws. Here, these are close to breaking anyways. No one will doubt you if you manage to actually repair this. And it's not too bad a loss for me if you fail, he gave Seth a smile. He belonged to the people that had kept observing them. Seth, being a talented blacksmith, explained the quality of the items he wore. Seth awkwardly smiled back. He was still unsure whether he preferred them taking up his offer or decline it. It could not be helped now. These people more or less saved his life. He was able to rest for a few hours thanks to them and felt okay now. He had used the break to shove a lot of rations into his belly and had significantly increased his mood. He grabbed the armor pieces and went into the demolished cave. It ruined the mood of the moment a little, but first, he turned toward Venturi. Of course, the guild will take care of the maintenance fee for the equipment separately, right? He asked with an innocent smile. The vice master barely managed to prevent his face from cringing. It was the first time the old mage had slightly lost his composure. Yes, of course, the guild will pay your remuneration as a blacksmith separately from your work as an adventurer. After making sure he would be paid for his work, he entered the cave. Some of the horses and wagons had actually survived the Drake raid. Less could be said about the skillful dwarven masonry. Most walls had turned into rough entrances to a network of tunnels. Seth summoned the spirit smith and brought the armor to the anvil. The armor he was given was a rare rated plate armor made from an alloy of mithril and dark iron. Instead of heating it up and actually forging the armor back into shape, he felt it was easier to simply use his hammer's special ability. Even though it cost mana, it was easier to fix breaks and cuts in the material this way. It had 3 simple enchantments to increase defense, endurance, and strength. Seth had seen this combination of enchantments before. Seth's level in enchantment was not high enough yet to apply several enchantments himself, but it was enough to repair it at the damaged places. Ding! You have successfully restored a rare item. Proficiency gained. Until now he only repaired his own items, so he was surprised when he got this notification. Both his enchantment and his blacksmith rose by 3%. He had only repaired an item but still got a good amount of proficiency. That was when he realized, it wasn't just increasing his reputation with the B ranks, but that repairing the items itself was a really good deal for himself. When he came back out after 25 minutes with a set of armor that looked as good as new, he could see the adventurer's jaws drop. Was it really that impressive that he was able to repair it? Did you really fix that broken armor in just half an hour? The B rank exclaimed as Seth gave back his armor. They had expected such a young blacksmith to maybe be able to barely patch up a rare rated item. They expected the items to be usable, but not completely restored. Looking at their unbelieving expressions made Seth get the idea that the increased crafting speed of his smithy might be an even bigger advantage than he had thought before. The better it looked, the better it was. Have them idolize him as the fastest smith in the West. Oh, maybe not. Girls might misunderstand what was meant. The fastest blacksmith. That should do it. As he was marveling in his own legend, the groups of adventurers kept piling up an assortment of common, uncommon, and rare items before him. The collected equipment of over 20 adventurers was more than he had guessed. He squinted at Venturi, who also looked a little surprised. I will be paid per item I repair, not the time I take. Seth stated and collected all the items. He left the old mage, who seemed like he wanted to say something, behind and entered the cave. Looking at all the different items, he found a few he didn't know and had no blueprint of. Seth used the chance to test the perk blacksmith's eyes and disassemble the items he didn't know and gain their blueprint before reassembling and repairing them. They were his first few rare blueprints, but they all had high material requirements. Ding! Skill, Blueprint Leave 2 has become Blueprint Leave 3. Suddenly his blueprint leveled up. So, this was also a way to level up his blueprint skill. Except for the really damaged things, he did not even need the forge. Weapons mostly needed to be resharpened, and he was able to save time by leaving the grinding to Cerberus. In the meantime, the search parties had returned. They had actually found some survivors who had fled last night. They looked even worse off than the proctors who had fought all night long. Their armors and weapons were broken, and they wore their simple spare clothes, just not to be naked. With them returning, Seth's work increased again. It became early afternoon before Seth was finished touching up the equipment. Not all items were rare and brought him several % of proficiency, but there were many items, and he ended up leveling enchantment and blacksmith. All the adventurers had sparkling eyes when they got back their repaired equipment that sparkled like it did the first day. They bought it. Seth also repaired the carts that were still left. After everyone was fully equipped and had a meal, they packed as much as they could on the carts that were now usable. The strong horses were used to pull the carts, while the rest of the adventurers, that did not fit on the carts, rode the normal horses. Like this, the caravan was about twice as fast as before, and they estimated to reach the next checkpoint in the evening. Chapter 108. Small break. Seth. Finn had returned. Finn found him and the party on their cart. The fairy sat down on his familiar shoulder and hugged his face. Finn. Guys, this is Finn. She's a great friend, that has often helped me on my journey. He introduced the fairy to the party. One by one he also introduced the party members to Finn, and they greeted her friendly and respectfully. It felt awkward seeing someone who viciously beat up a wyvern act cute in front of them. I am really glad you are here. But, how come you are here? Didn't you have something to do back home? I thought you would be gone for longer. Finn's face blushed a little as she recounted the reason why she had left and what had happened after she returned home. She had just met the party, so it was a little embarrassing for her to talk about running away from marriage to adventure with Seth. People could misunderstand their relationship. Then Seth narrated to her his time in Aura, and the party member kept jumping in when it was something they had experienced together. When he told them about how he set up a shop, the party member listened just as interested as Finn. When he mentioned how much Mina had helped him by introducing him to Marn, Seth realized that something was wrong. The cat girl had not talked much since the fairy joined them, despite her outgoing personality. Seth had been sure she would get along great with the fairy. What happened? Seth was not good at reading people, he knew that. And from a lot of annoying novel plots he knew, that reading too much in someone's behavior would lead to dumb misunderstandings. So, he did what every dense main character should do. The blacksmith left Finn with the party and sat close to the silent Mina. What's wrong? You seem down, he asked her how she felt. The beastman girl looked up to him with big teary eyes, like a puppy. My favorite dagger broke, she said with a shaky voice. Seth could help but burst out laughing. He had thought it was something more serious. Mina. How can you laugh at my suffering? She started shaking Seth. I really liked that dagger. I had to save up money for several weeks to buy it. It was my pride and joy. Now I have to use my crappy spare one. Tears finally started rolling down her cheeks. She seemed really serious about it, but she just looked way too cute. He could help but hug her tightly. You should have asked me, I still have some good daggers on me. I know it's no replacement for your favorite dagger, but it should be better than your spare. But you said you would not give out free stuff. And not even to your girlfriend, she stuttered and blushed. He really wanted to tease her, but he refrained from doing so. He took out one of the few serpent daggers he had kept and handed it to her. It's different when it comes to a friend and a lifesaver. She took the dagger and made big puppy eyes looking at the pure white bone dagger. She could not appraise it, but she had more than enough experience as an assassin to recognize a good dagger. She played around with it a little and then hugged him happily. "Thank you so much." With that, he left her to her own devices as she was completely occupied with her new toy. When he sat down, where had sat before as felt a fairy landing on his shoulder. "Finn is gone for a few weeks and you get a girlfriend? Did you hold back because of Finn?" she asked curiously with a slight blush. "Girlfriend? Hey." Seth thought for a moment but could not come to a conclusion. "I don't know. It started with a one-night stand and I like her. However, it's not really a relationship where I would call her my girlfriend. We didn't even have a serious date yet," he pondered. It was true, they had not really done anything traditional couples did. She also didn't act very lovey-dovey towards him. "And how does Mina think?" "I think she likes me for my device and stamina. I heard other guys have a hard time surviving a night with her unscathed." If Seth had to describe the relationship, it would probably be friends with benefits. He just didn't know whether this was a thing in a magical medieval culture. Finn looked at him perplexed. So, that was it. She had really thought Seth had fallen in love or something. She was relieved that, in the end, he was just used as a sex toy and was having fun. It lifted a tiny weight off her heart. She had no idea it was there. They spent the rest of the time getting friendly with each other. There were no interruptions by the wyverns or drakes on their way to the next checkpoint. Only smaller monsters that the people riding on the horses were easily able to get rid of. On this stretch they did not come across any other travelers they were supposed to save. The only other travelers they had met until now, had been the traders in the first checkpoint. None of them has survived the first night. The next checkpoint was fortunately not a cave. It was a big pillar of pure white crystal on a great plateau. Magic formations were carved into the stone around the crystal and it created a big force field that repelled wyverns specifically. Other monsters could still near the camp, but at least they were safe from the wyverns. They actually met a group of hunters and peddlers with some adventurers that had camped at the second checkpoint. Hunters were the only people who dared to stay alone in these mountains. Their information was important, as they reported that what they had seen last night had happened all over the wyvern territory. The hunters had retreated here from the vicinity and gathered here as it was the safest place around. The traders had stayed here since last night, as they did not dare to travel on with the little protection they had with the few adventurers with them. They greeted the caravan and reinforcement party happily, as they were their way out of this situation. The caravan convened with these newcomers and decided on guard duties for the coming night. They made big bonfires and started to cook actual meals to increase motivation. Wasn't he making big light in the dark night asking to be attacked? Not really. The monsters that actually hunted in the night, had a good night vision. They would stay away from the bright blinding light. As Seth had guessed, Finn easily got along with the rest of his party. During the meal, Seth's eyes fell on the 10 survivors of various parties who were technically naked and unarmed now. Except for the 2 casters, they were no better than the merchants who needed protection. Maybe he could use this chance to make some more business. Seth approached the Venturi's tent. Not everyone had big tents prepared for them, only the A ranks. Everyone else had to stay at the simple campfires. It was to save time in the morning. Voices could be heard from the tent, they were probably talking about their next steps. "Hello, Vice Master," he called out. The voices went silent. "Seth? Is that you?" The old mage came out of his tent. "Yes, I have a little proposition to make. I saw that we have people who are potential firepower but lack equipment." Seth's suggestion was simple. He would get a tent, make some items for those people and the guild would obviously pay for it. "This greedy little," was written all over Venturi's noble face. But Seth still got the tent and a written promise that the guild would pay for the provided equipment. Seth gave the naked people a visit and told them about the deal. He took some rough measurements and asked for their weapon preferences before leaving again. He reached the tent, that was hastily set up for him, and summoned his smithy and Cerberus. A simple mixed armor of plates and leather became a lot easier with Cerberus at his side. Seth concentrated on making simple weapons from high-quality steel while the golem worked on making steel plates with its bare hands. 8 simple sets of armor and weapons were done in a record time of 3 hours. They didn't look nice or polished. But their performance was good and they were rated uncommon. They would suffice. Despite the rough looks, the adventurers were happy not to be naked anymore. Venturi had an appraisal skill and gave the items a once-over. He was actually surprised, that all of them were rated uncommon. He had no reason to complain, and Seth had won a tent for him and his party to stay for the night. Chapter 109. Reaching Torah. Underscore 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 un. The night was quiet. They traveled during the next day, too. Were the wyverns tired from the fight against the blood-slave drakes? No matter what the reason was, Seth and the rest were glad not having to fight. Of course, this did not mean their journey became comfortable. The climate of the region became rougher and rougher the closer they came to Torah. Snow covered the environment and the harsh cold crept into their armors. Wind kept pulling on their clothes and the wagon's covers. This was the reason, they were glad, that there were no attacks. Fighting under such conditions would have been terrible. Even the mood to chatter had made way to their teeth's clatter. Their company had grown with the additional hunters and traders. The hunters were useful as they knew the region and could scout their surroundings. They found some frozen corpses along the road, but there were no concrete signs of whether they were killed by monsters or the climate. The priests showed mercy and used some mana on buffs to fight the cold, but their relief was great when they reached the next checkpoint, a natural hot spring. The place smelled of sulfur and other volcanic gases, so it was not a nice smell. Nobody had the urge to go for a dip either. But it was nice and warm in the dwarven cave heated by geothermal energy. They were heavily guarded during this night, to prevent what had happened in the last cave they had tried to stay in. Still, the night was almost suspiciously quiet. It was as if that night had been a lie. They set off early in the morning. The goal was to skip the next checkpoint and reach Torah in the evening. The recent peace had dulled their vigilance. The valley they entered at noon changed that completely. The road led through a small valley basin covered in a thick layer of snow. Sticking from the snow were a huge number of frozen corpses and body parts. Like a forest of limbs, they were reaching up to the sky from beneath the snow. Judging by the shocked expression of the hunters, this was not supposed to be here. Was this a big caravan that had been ambushed by drakes? Or did the wyvern throw their victim here to store food? No matter the reason, their nerves were taut as the caravan tried to hurry past the macabre scenery. It reminded Seth so much of many scenes from games and movies. He had the powerful urge to preemptively set the whole valley on fire. However, he couldn't. There was no guarantee that there was a real danger. Seth couldn't just reveal his powers and probably increase his arsonist title, for no reason but being cautious. It was when they reached the bottom of the valley basin when Seth saw a small movement in the corner of his eyes. I knew it. He was not the only one who had seen the movements. Many adventurers took a battle stance and their colleagues soon followed after Venturi gave the command. The corpses were slow, so the vice master acted fast and used the time. The caravan's wagons were moved to form an easily defendable circle, with the horses and non-combatants in the middle. The parties got in formation to defend the wagon fort. All the damaged and frozen corpses around them started moving in broken and erratic movements. It looks very unnatural and off-putting to watch them walk on broken bones. Their broken arms bend in weird angles as if possessing several joints. Corpse Puppet Leave 24. Puppet suggested that someone was controlling these things. Among the shambling marionettes faster, more agile shadows rose from the snow. Bloodslave Leave 32. They were the same creatures Seth had met in the abandoned dungeon. Be careful. The fast ones are a lot stronger than their level suggests, he warned the others as they got ready to defend against the wall of rotten flesh. The frontliners were surrounding the wagon fort, while the casters and ranged units stood on the wagons and carts to attack the monsters slowly surrounding them. The corpse puppets could pose a threat to D-ranks or ordinary traders but posed no threat to them. Even with their numbers. The blood slave's strength could have been a surprise without Seth's warning, but with it, the people stayed vigilant. The humanoid blood slaves could pose a threat to ordinary C ranks at most, but not to this party full of B and A ranks. Even if they were stronger than their level suggested, a genuine B rank adventurer was leave 50 plus and kitted out in powerful items. It was just a matter of time before the undead and blood slaves were wiped out under the hand of the overpowered adventurers. Whoever set up this trap had expected bunnies, not bears, to step in. The most fascinating show of power in Seth's eyes was probably Venturi. The old mage had chanted something for 5 minutes and suddenly unleashed a wave of energy. There was no fire or great special effects, but all corpse puppets in a radius of 50 meters around them suddenly started to blister as if they were burned and melted into puddles of rotten sludge. It was one of the most horrific processes Seth had seen ever since leaving home. The caravan hurriedly left the valley behind after spending 2 hours exterminating the vermin. Seth got the vague feeling that someone did not want anyone to reach Tora. Finn had told them what had happened in Aura. About how there was something that had upset the wyverns and Tora didn't tell them. It seemed pretty obvious now what had upset them, but what was their reason to keep these things secret? They increased their speed to make up for the time lost in the valley. Even the powerful horses the rescue party had come with were slowly reaching the limit of their capabilities. It just showed how strong they were. The normal horses with only single riders had a hard time keeping up with them pulling the carts. There were more traps like this on the way. The corpses of victims or monsters suddenly moving and attacking. Unlike before, they didn't stop but simply passed by the slow undead with overwhelming speed. Venturi's decision was to be fast and efficient. He did not take any more unnecessary fights. The adventurers on the other hand dearly wished to stop and fight. Even the non-combatants had this wish. The wagons were not spring-loaded for the most part and traveled at full speed on rough roads. They would do anything for a break from this torture. Even bigger was their joy when they finally saw Tora appear on the horizon. The city was a lot smaller than Aura but similar in build. The biggest part of the city was located within the slopes of a mountain peak with only a small part being buildings and houses surrounded by a big city wall. The latter had less of a city and more of a fortified settlement. On the other hand, was Tora the doorway to the subterranean dwarven kingdoms. While Aura's prosperity and size came from the many mines it was connected to, Tora was a crossroad where many trade routes of the different dwarven cities came together and connected to the surface. This great trade hub laid before them in concerning silence. Chapter 110. Leaving Tora. The great iron gates of Tora were closed. The road and mountains around the city were empty. There was only the howling of the icy winds over the sharp stones and silent snow. Seth didn't know what a fantasy city in a medieval setting was supposed to sound like from afar, but the silence was unsettling. And he was not the only one judging by the expression of some of the other adventurers. Venturi and the A-ranks went ahead of the caravan and knocked at the smaller door embedded in the gate. A magic lantern lit up above the gate. "Who are you? State your business," a rough and aggressive voice echoed from the gatehouse above. Between the battlement appeared the messy face of a bearded dwarf. "I am Venturi, the vice-guild master of Aura. We are the caravan and the rescue party. You should be informed about our mission. Open the gates and let us in. HMMPH leave. You will regret entering the city. It will be better if you just return the way you came from." The voice was grumpy, but within it swung a hint of resignation. "We are tired and our mounts are worn out. It will become night soon and we want to be able to reach a safe place. Please, let us in." Venturi insisted. They didn't know the dwarf's reasons, but they could not stay out during the night. "All right. This is your decision. Just don't blame me later. I warned you." With a clattering of chains and clinking of gears the gates of Tora opened for the weary caravan. The streets of Tora were empty and just as silent as the mountains. "What is going on here?" Mina muttered beside him. Even Finn had a serious expression. The only people they saw were a few guards that came from the guard's house. The grumpy dwarf was actually the captain of the guards and he heard Mina's unintentional mutter. "Most citizens have already been evacuated. Tora is in lockdown now. You should leave in the morning," he stated. "What is the situation actually?" Venturi talked to the guard captain. Venturi decided that the party should hear it too, so the dwarf started to explain. Tora had been hit by something like a large area curse. Actually, not just Tora, but it seemed like the whole region of the mountains was affected by the curse. The longer one stayed within the area of effect, the stronger the curse would become and reveal itself as a terrible plague that turned the infected into a monster. They became blood slaves. The lower one's level, the easier it was to get affected. On top of infecting the living, it resurrected the dead similar to a necromancer's spell. The stronger the corpse, the stronger the resulting undead was. Unfathomable numbers of generations of dwarves had risen from the stone crypts below Tora and were striving through the subterranean city. It had cost them a lot to secure the passages to the other subterranean cities and evacuate the citizens before the curse plague could turn too many of them. Only the priests and guards stayed behind to try and find a solution which explained the empty city. It was still dangerous to wander in the city, as the blood slaves were hard to eradicate. The guards separate them onto several inns in the cities where they could stay for the night. To his surprise, the fairy did not insist on sleeping on Seth's chest and took a single room. The reason soon revealed itself when a pent-up Mina sneaked into his room. Her drive was really something else. This was even approved by his fairy friend. He had no idea these two had gotten this close. Against Seth's prophetic expectations, there was no life-threatening action to be had in Torah. Although, Mina tried really hard. The caravan had unpacked the cargo into the warehouses of their business partners. In this regard, the situation in the town had little effect on the planned procedure. From the beginning, the caravan had not planned to stay longer than a night. Of course, that was before knowing that the whole region was cursed and dangerous. They refrained from loading anything to bring back to Ora and decided to travel as light as possible. In the morning all adventurers and travelers were seated on a horse and ready to return. Seth was really thankful for the system and its HP recovery. He would not have been able to ride a horse with his sore butt from riding the cart. To make it even more pleasant, Seth had no idea how to ride a horse. He got the chance to ride with Mina on one of the strong horses and could closely hug her from behind. HNG. Hey, stop it. She was unexpectedly shy when he got a little aggressive in public and kept constantly blushing. But she didn't dislike it enough to actually stop him. Stop teasing her, it was Finn who got upset on her behalf and made Seth behave. Compared to what Seth could have imagined, traveling back like this was a refreshingly safe way. Yesterday, he had been afraid they would maybe have to use those undead-riddled tunnels to get back to Ora. He was really glad that he did not have to partake in this kind of adventure. Riding a horse while clinging to a cute girl was a lot better than riding a jumpy cart. The guards of Torah were nice enough to give them thick warm cloaks for the way back. 3 days later they came back to Ora. The travel had some fights, but nothing dangerous. They had not seen the wyverns or drakes again. Ora had changed. The streets were not as bustling as before and there were a lot more guards patrolling the streets. What Seth could not know, was that these were the results of his report. Venturi had not forgotten what the young blacksmith had told him. He contacted Ora's guild branch from the guild's facilities in Torah and warned them about the curse and the possibility that it was also happening in Ora. As a reaction, the guild sent in an A-rank party to crack down on that dungeon, which led to them interrupting a ritual that was probably part of installing the curse. Still, there were probably more small dungeons like this in Ora, so the curse could not be stopped completely. The result was that the city was hit by a severely weakened version of the curse. At least when it came to the plague part of the curse. Corpses still started to rise and walk through the streets. Like in Torah, the bigger problem was the huge number of dwarven undead that suddenly flooded from old crypts and tunnels into the dwarven district. But Seth didn't know this. He only saw the town a little less busy than usual. The first thing Seth did was ignore everything around him and lock himself into his room at the inn. He undressed, washed up, and dove into the bed, sleeping a full 2-4 before leaving his room again. Leaving his room had only one consequence. He emptied half the inn's kitchen and ate for almost 3 hours non-stop. The tension from the last weeks, the dungeon dives, the travel, that night, it all fell off him and he needed to recover in his way. "Hey, where have you been?" It was Mina who sat down beside him. "Rehab," he answered between 2 bites. "Arim, okay? The vice master was looking for you. The exam's over and evaluate. You should give him a visit. Let us meet later," she said before leaving. She and Mike had their own things to deal with. Oh yeah. He also needed to get his money from Venturi. He would go give the guild a visit and then look after Marn. Even though the shop was plan B, it did not hurt having a successful business. Chapter 111. Halls of Stone. He had not known where the ferry had been, but Finn joined the meal as Seth came to the end of his feast. They finally had some quiet time together and they had a lot of things to talk about. They could not before on the journey. Like Puffle's new name and Seth's plans in Ora. The Ivisors in question actually stood behind at the inn. It has leveled up a lot in the recent weeks and now needed time for itself to examine the changes it went through. Puffles did not yet want to tell Seth anything, but he expected a minor power upgrade once the pet was done with its meditations. Finn accompanied him on his way towards his shop and they kept talking on the way. Finn also took her time to complain to him about her parents and her people and that damn prince or whatever who wanted to marry her. Marn, the half-elven blacksmith, was surprised when he saw the amicably talking and laughing young man in a fairy enter the shop. Seth had been back earlier than expected. Almost a whole week earlier. How was Marn supposed to explain to him that his smithy and the golem had suddenly vanished overnight? "Hey, Marn. I am back. This is Finn, a very good friend." Seth saw Marn hiding his uneasiness, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. "What up?" Seth asked, concerned. Had the loan sharks come again or something? Had he lost money? As all kinds of thoughts flew through his mind, Marn erupted with the truth. He was a terribly honest person. Keeping such a simple thing from his benefactor gave him unusual amounts of stress. Seth almost started laughing when he heard Marn's concerns. And then he felt a little guilty because he had caused this misunderstanding by not explaining the skill to Marn. It was not the elf's fault. They could literally see the weight fall off Marn's heart when Seth told him that there was nothing wrong. In the time he was gone, there were a few new weapons in the weapon racks. Seth had told Marn that he could use some of the high-quality steel he had left and that he did. There were a few new uncommon blades that ranged between daggers and short swords. They had increased stats similar to his first tries with soul infusion, and the description also mentioned it was thanks to his special treatment. It was as Seth had suspected. When he asked Marn, he told Seth that it was because of the few elvish smithing ballads he knew. Seth had hoped this was the case so that he might be able to learn them from the half-elf. Finn was a little disappointed when she saw the location of Seth's shop, but she was positively surprised by the neat and clean interior and his handsome employee/business partner. They closed the shop and sat down in the back to talk. Marn excitedly told him how busy the days were when people found out about Seth's weapons. Especially the poison daggers were selling like hotcakes. Unlike Seth, the adventurers valued the poison effect quite highly. Slowing a monster and dealing damage over time was often a bigger advantage compared to pure damage. And Seth's weapons sported good damage on top of it. The weapons Seth left behind had all been sold and business had calmed down a little, but it was still better than it ever was during the time when Marn ran it alone. Customers would often come in looking for the serpent weapons. Although most left in disappointment when Marn told them that those were sold out, some would buy one of Marn's weapons instead. This made Seth feel a little conflicted when he stored the money in his inventory. He was not like those terrible, ruthless, cutthroat, greedy merchants who lacked any kind of conscience and made young blacksmiths hand over 70% of the selling price. It was Marn's decision to give him the money, as he was the store owner and his benefactor. "Marn, I feel bad taking that much money from you," he told him honestly. "Don't be. You are my..." "Yeah, I know it does not bother you. But it does bother me. I have a suggestion. You sell your weapons here and I take a 10% fee, and in exchange, would it be okay for you to teach me some of your smithing ballads?" Seth had expected the elf to react offended. That his ballads were some kinds of trade secret his master taught him and that he could not simply teach them to him, even if he was his benefactor. "Are you sure that's okay? I only know a few and I mastered only one. It's one of the reasons I left my village. I am really bad in singing, for an elf." He scratched his cheek embarrassedly. Finn in the back almost started laughing. An elf that could not sing. "That's okay. Don't worry. Just teach me." Seth's eyes were sparkling in anticipation, but the tiny voice of obligation reigned on his parade. "Didn't you want to visit the guild? Finn thinks it's important if the vice master invited you. I could go law. The vice master is an important person, you know? What if you come late and he simply keeps the quest reward?" Her unbeatable arguments convinced him. He just quickly went to the back, installing the workshop and making Cerberus continue to make scales before saying goodbye to Marn and leaving. They took their time wandering toward the guild and stopped in front of its gates. The entrance was blocked by masses of adventurers trying to get in. What was happening here? Before they could dive into the horde of people, a guild staff approached them. "Are you Seth, the blacksmith?" he asked, and explained that Venturi had sent him to bring them in via a side entrance. "What is with all these people?" Seth asked as they entered the guild. "It's because of the new quest. Anyone below B rank can take it. It's about helping in cleansing the city from the curse. You already have a way to cleanse it?" Finn asked unexpectedly. "More or less. Since we know part of the curse, the magicians were able to come up with an emergency measure." The guild staff smiled but didn't elaborate any further. They stopped in front of a big door, the office of the vice guild master. Inside was a spacious room, filled to the brim with books and scrolls and weird magical devices. It was what you would expect from an old wizard's abode. Somewhere in the sea of paper was the indication of a desk, and there sat Venturi reading a letter. "Oh. You came," he said when he noticed their presence and looked up from his letter. Finn stayed outside and Seth made his way using a thin path where he could see the floor between the stacks of books and paper and stopped before the desk. "Here," the mage said solemnly and put a leather bag on the table he had fished from somewhere beneath the table. "The remuneration for your blacksmithing service. It 55 gold, it should be enough to pay for the maintenance and equipment. Seth nodded and took the heavy leather bag. When he put it in his inventory, it was described to contain 55 gold. Good. Here is the quest reward for the exam and joining the rescue quest, he said, and put down a much smaller bag. Inside were another 10 gold. Well. Shall we talk about the exam grades? You passed. Despite showing a lack of wisdom, you made it up with your performance. Give me your guild card, I will upgrade your rank to B. After taking his card, Venturi shoved aside a stack of paper, revealing a magic device to edit guild cards below it. There you go. You did this to get entrance to the Halls of Stone, right? Here. The old man also handed him a scroll of parchment. It's a recommendation from me. I am undecided whether you are fit to be a B-rank adventurer, but you have proven great skill as a blacksmith. It should be helpful when you look for a dwarven master to get tutelage. Venturi was speaking in a very neutral tone the whole time, but Seth could feel a little kindness when he handed him the scroll. Now leave. I hope I don't have to deal with you ever again. Seth didn't know what had rained on the Vice Master parade. Maybe he got scolded for agreeing to pay him that much gold? Who knew? Seth happily left the office. He could finally enter the Halls of Stone. The Dwarven district was open for business. The young blacksmith did not simply rush towards the gates and enter this new realm of possibilities. He still had urgent stuff to do first. One was to meet up with the party and get an objective appraisal of the materials he gained from the wyverns. He spent some time showing the city to Finn as they returned to the inn, where I found Mike and Mina together with their parents. He invited them to go and appraise the materials at the auction house, and they happily agreed to accompany him after the meal. Chapter 112. Halls of Stone, 2. After the meal, the group of 4 left the inn. When Seth said auction house, he meant the system institution where he had sold many of his weapons during his journey. He had actually gotten a grey membership card thanks to the numerous products he sold. They didn't have to wait long for an appointment with an appraiser. Appraiser was literally a job that focused solely on the appraisal skill. Seth put down the scales, the leather, the fangs, and the horns on the table between them. The professional before them was a middle-aged man in a fine suit. His expression did not change before rare material, as it was something he actually saw often in his job. His gloved hand gently and experiences started to handle and examine the materials. These scales are, to be barely rated rare. They are just a slight bit above uncommon. I would estimate them to be worth 20 silver each. The fangs are very good, a solid rare material. 2 gold each. The horns, well, they have a nice pearly white. Just below rare, a mason could use them for ornamentation, 20 silver. This leather is smooth and tender despite its thickness. It has a high affinity with wind magic and is suited for enchantment. It's also a solid rare rating. A good tailor could do some amazing things with this. 5 gold for the whole piece, he said in one long monologue without anyone interrupting him. So, his assumption was right, that some of the ratings were different from what he had seen. Seth and the 2 siblings discussed what to do. They decided that Seth would buy the scales, the fangs, and the leather from them. He offered to make them custom equipment instead of paying them money, and they happily agreed to his offer. Mina was still over the moon because of the dagger he had given her, and her raving had long since convinced Mike. They sold the horns to the auction house and the siblings took it to split it among the party. It was already getting late, so Seth decided to visit the Halls of Stone the next day. Instead, he gave Nadal a visit. Seth, the old tailor exclaimed with actual joy. It seemed like he had really taken a liking to Seth. The staff had immediately brought him to the master when he asked to visit him. Hello, Nadal. I am back from the quest. This is Finn, one of my best friends. He introduced the fairy to the old man. Oh ho, a fairy. Nice to meet you, he said with a kind smile. How can I help you, Seth? You didn't come just to say hello, right? He asked with a glint. It was as if he could smell that Seth had some good materials on him. Oh yeah. I actually have several orders today, he said with a smile. He grabbed Finn from his shoulder and held her before the old tailor. Can you make her something like a martial arts robe from the bronze thread? He asked with puppy eyes. Finn was completely complexed. She had no idea what was going on here. Nadal on the other hand looked at her with measuring eyes. That shouldn't be a problem. Seth. What are you doing? She asked exasperated. I am doing what I can to repay your kindness, he said with a smile that made the fairy blush and fall silent. Next. You said you had several orders. The tailor beckoned him to continue. Seth brought out the rest from last time plus some puffles had made recently. Do you think there is enough thread left to make a magician's robe from it? The person he thought of was Lixus. Nadal had offered him to make things for free from rare-rated material, and Seth was set on abusing this to his heart's content. It depends on the size. You don't have another girl in your pocket, right? He joked. I will send her here tomorrow. She is not a fairy, but she is on the smaller side. Her name is Lixus and she is a quarter elf. There should be no problem then. The tailor nodded understanding. And, he could read that there was more. Seth brought out the wyvern leather and Nadal's eyes sparkled. He knew that he had hooked the old man again. Could you make me cloak from this? Or maybe a pair of pants? Seth asked. There is not enough for a good cloak. But if I use some cloth made from the thread, I could make you a pair of pants and shirt to wear below the jacket from last time, the other suggested. It was as Seth had suspected. Even with the little experience he had in sewing, he had guessed that there was not enough material for a cloak. He agreed to Nadal's suggestion and left with the still completely flustered Finn. He had wanted to make equipment for her for a long while, but until he got spirit smithing and found Nadal, he had no idea what he could do for the tiny battle freak. Any kind of armor he could make would have gotten in the way of her movements, and his goldsmith skills were not even close to good enough to make tiny jewelry. With soul forging he would even be able to enchant the tiny robe for her. It was almost night when they returned to the inn. After a good eating competition with Puffles, they almost fell into a food coma in Seth's room. It was like during their journey together, and Seth felt his heart calming as he fell asleep. I was close to noon on the next day when he arrived before the gates which lead to the halls of stone. Finn decided to tag along while the rest of the party were busy with their vacations. After the exam, it was not just Seth who needed his alone time. The gates dividing the dwarven city carved into the mountains and the outer section shone in the sun. The doors were made of massive gold-colored bronze and depicted the history of creation the dwarves believed in. Born from the spirits of the earth, the first dwarfs were born from the roots of the mountains. Formed from stone themselves, they understood this element the best and formed it as they wished. Mason was the first dwarven profession. The later generations inherited their dexterity and bond with the element and became miners and blacksmiths. They made the most intricate jewelry and weapon, even the arrogant elves would come to wonder and trade for their products. To sum it up, they were really into craftsmanship. The sentries in front of the gate were dwarves kitted in an impressive set of full-plate armor. The imposing edgings on the surface hid the intricate magic circuits engraved into the armor. Each piece was uncommon or rare with 4 or 5 effects that increased various attributes, resistances, damage, and defense. Even without a skilled priest, they were thoroughly buffed and balanced warriors. At least when it came to equipment and its effects. Seth's heart pumped faster. This was exactly what he was looking for. Of course, his aspirations were even higher. Once his skill was on par with his dreams, he would become an immortal juggernaut. Finn gave him a slap on the back of the head when she noticed him drifting off into daydreams. It was their turn and, although they could not see the dwarf's eyes below his helmet, the way his eye slits looked at them seemed a little annoyed at them. His hand signaling to hand over their papers enforced this image. After checking their adventurer cards, he waved his hand at them to make them enter. He had not even said one word the whole time. When Seth stepped past the bronze gates into the halls of stone, he instantly understood the name. They entered an almost stupidly huge hall. It was as if the dwarves had tried to hollow out the whole mountain like a Halloween pumpkin and put the peak back on as a cap. The floor was smooth and polished, showing all the natural veins and inclusions of the mountain. The ceiling that vanished somewhere in the darkness above was held by an uncountable number of pillars that filled the trunks of trees in a giant forest. The pillars were covered in carvings of lifelike faces. Most of them had a well-kept bushy beard and a dignified, serious expression. Seth was reminded of stories of people being petrified and displayed as statues. This was the level of detail of these carvings. If it wasn't for the warm and inviting light of the magic lanterns all around, Seth would have guessed that he entered one of the most unsettling boss rooms a game developer could come up with. Every face had a plate with their name and class below it. Was this maybe some kind of hall of fame? Seth only came back to his sense when he saw the small fairy, stuck in her own marvel of this place, floating in front of his face. It was rare to see Finn so completely speechless. They were not the only ones. Some people around them had also frozen at the sight of this hall, while others were actually looking at them with a knowing smile. Everyone who entered here for the first time, was in their situation at one point. Chapter 113. City of Eternal Night. Most descriptions of subterranean cities Seth knew from fiction described them as being built in some giant underground cavern, an underground space like hollow earth, inside the cone of a dormant volcano, or maybe built at the bottom and into the sides of a deep crevice. All of it was things Seth had somewhat expected. But not the total lack thereof. The real meaning of Hall of Stones came to him, when the pillars in the distance were not pillars, but skyscrapers. What Seth saw had nothing fantastic, but was almost unfathomable to him. Like a modern, planned-out city, completely made of massive high-risers supported this city in the darkness the weight of the mountains above. The closer they came, the more intricate and lavish the surfaces became. Completely carved out of the bedrock by the hands of true craftsmen, there were many intricate ornaments and giant sculptures decoration these high-rises. There were many different sources of light in different colors, either highlighting the artworks or as part of the art itself. Fantasy world? My butt! The dwarven city had a lot more of steampunk or cyberpunk. Living in this city was like living in an artwork. The streets were packed with all kinds of people. Many were dwarfs, but there were also a lot of merchants, adventurers, and travelers. Compared to this place carved into the roots of the mountains, Aura outside was like a suburb at best. "Is this your first time here?" a friendly voice asked them. It was a young man in colorful clothes. The two had already nodded without thinking as he continued. "Great. I am with the Adventurers Guild. Take these brochures. They have a simple map of the Dwarven district and the recommended inns and shops." It was a similar booklet to the one they could get in the Adventurer Guild, but since not everyone that came here was necessarily an adventurer, these were handed out publicly. Looking at the map, Seth was again reminded of a modern city. As beautiful and diverse as the giant buildings looked from the outside, they all had the same layout, a square. The streets were cut out between them, formed a basic grid called the warp and weft streets. There were 23 of these habitable pillars. From the booklet, Seth learned that this was the city of eternal night. Each pillar was created by one of the great dwarven master masons and craftsmen of Aura's history. The rooms in these pillars were actually extremely expensive. Seth felt a little relieved when he saw the normal parts of the city. They were similar in their layout, but in a lot smaller scale and divided into different layers similar to the outside Aura. Here the magic lights would follow the outside day and night circle. The commercial district was actually like a giant department store. Each big field of business had its own layer except for inns. The most expensive inns even provided a view of the city of eternal night. It was their version of having a view of the sea here. Obviously, the place Seth and Finn visited was the lair of blacksmiths. Here the buildings had several stories and normally belonged to one craftsman who had his workshop and in one place, often sharing it with several generations of his family. It was a true wonderland for Seth. Just window shopping filled his material catalog with all kinds of new and exotic materials, often from monsters he had never even heard of. He doubted that he would ever be able to get familiar with all of them. He was so preoccupied with all the new sight, that he had almost missed the change in Finn's expression. After the initial wonder had subsided, an expression of unease surfaced on her face. "Finn, are you okay?" he belatedly asked. Finn is, okay? It's just so constricting. Everywhere are walls. Everything is stone. Finn is anxious. Finn is not used to be this, cut off from the world. This was simply not the right environment for a fairy like Finn, who descended from spirits of the wind and air. She was used to freely fly under the blue sky. This place exerted a similar influence on her like a tight space to someone with claustrophobia. Seeing that Finn was not doing well, Seth resolutely decided to leave for now, despite her objections. Seth didn't have the heart to watch the fairy suffer, just to accompany him on a sightseeing trip. Finn is really SOR. Zip it. Seth interrupted her attempt to apologize. It's not your fault. Forget it already. Let us go and eat. I know a great restaurant. Seth and Finn fetched Puffles from the inn and visited the restaurant where he had met Mina and the party. The receptionist already warned the chefs when he assigned Seth to a table. The who had once ordered the whole menu had made a lasting impression on the restaurant staff. Now he had returned to continue his legend. Accompanied by the voracious fairy and the insatiable Ivisor, they pressured the kitchen staff to achieve their peak performance. As the lights of hope slowly dimmed in the head chef's tired eyes, the glint of greed grew in the manager's eyes. Finn's mood had marginally improved. With satisfied stomachs the group returned to the inn, leaving behind a dismayed kitchen staff and a happy restaurant manager. They met Mina at the lobby of the inn. Finn and Puffles went to their rooms, leaving Seth behind to talk with the cat beastman. They talked about the party and Seth's future plans. After all, Seth achieved his immediate goal, to get access to the Dwarven city. Mina and Mike's party had become beranked to take part in berated quests. These quests would often require them to leave Aura for extended periods of time. They were fated to meet less often from now on. It would have been a lie to say that Seth did not feel a little conflicted about leaving their party. He had taken a liking to these new friends, and Mina was even a little more than just a friend. "Don't think I will let you off?" Mina suddenly said with a mischievous smirk. "I had a hard time finding someone like you. I will still come and find you whenever we are back." It sounded almost like a threat, not a promise. After getting over the more or less serious talk, they chatted about their day. Mina and Mike spent time with their adoptive parents. There was a lot to talk and catch up on. Seth blushed when she told him that her mother thought he was a good catch and pressured her to make their relationship something more serious. Seth was glad that he did not have to make a decision in this case, since Mina herself made it clear that she was not looking for something serious at this point in time. Seth on the other hand told her about the city of Eternal Night they had visited and his plans to find a master. Though, he had no idea yet how to find one. He also worried about Finn. If he was to find a master there, he would obviously start living there. He could not ask the fairy to stay with him and suffer. Maybe Finn could come with us. Mina threw into the room. She had gotten along well with Finn and the whole party like her. It was not just out of kindness. There would be a great increase in fighting power if the fairy joined their party. It was a good idea in Seth's opinion, and he told her he would talk about it with the fairy. "Oh yeah, what about that guy from the bar?" she suddenly asked. "What guy?" Seth had no idea what she was talking about. "Don't you remember that dwarf? What was his name again? Vathon something. It was shortly after we met and I was about to drag you." "Oh, I mean we were about to leave together," she interrupted herself, blushing, and changed her wording. "He actually came after you and thanked you for paying his bill." Seth had no memory of this at all. But how was he supposed to find a random dwarf in this giant city? "How am I supposed to find him? It's not like I can randomly wander around the halls of stone and hope that he approaches me after some random encounter in a bar." True. How about visiting that bar again? It's worth a try and I wouldn't mind having a drink." She got really close and whispered the last part in his ear. She seduced him to take her out, so they left the inn and walked off to get drunk. Chapter 114. Vathon Stone Chiseler. He had a déjà vu. A warm and soft cat girl was sleeping in his arms and his eyes fell on a room with clothes randomly spread all around. But this time he could roughly remember what had happened the last night. Poison resistance was no joke. If it had not leveled up, he might not remember again. They had visited the bar where he had gone after Finn suddenly left. The barkeeper was still as stoic as before. The bar was so dirty, even Mina, who regularly visited places like this, was a little disgusted. When Seth went to the bar and ordered the same as last time, her face lost some color when she saw the bottle of alcohol with some kind of insect inside. "This is what you drank before we met." She actually took away the glass from him and emptied it on the floor. "You won't drink this kind of poison with me around. When we found the dwarf, we will leave, got it?" She made clear that she would not drink anything in this place and would not let him drink anything either. "Sure." Seth gave up on the drink and tried to talk to the bartender to get some information, but he stayed silent. The only thing he did was looking at Mina with daggers in his eyes. He obviously didn't like how she behaved in his bar. Fortunately, before he tried to offer him money to make him talk, someone talked to him. "Oh, hey. Aren't you the guy who kept drinking the viper's venom?" It was the dwarf who had drunk with him back then. "You still remember me?" "How could I forget someone who kept drinking the most infamous booze in this place like water? You even made me think it wasn't that bad, until lost consciousness. I had a hard time regaining my sight after that day," he said with a jolly laugh. He sat down beside Seth and ordered an ale. He glanced at Mina. "It seems like that girl is still with you, et." Mina blushed. It was painfully obvious in that night that she only dragged off Seth for a one-night stand. After some talking, the dwarf introduced himself again as Vathon Stone Chiseler. He was a sculptor apprentice in the layer of masons. When Seth told him about his profession and goals in Aura, he readily agreed to help Seth, especially after they left that rundown bar and went to a nicer place where Seth paid for all the drinks. A dwarf's appreciation and friendship went a long way if you invited him for a night of fun and alcohol. This time it was Seth who got up first, collected his clothes, and got dressed. "You are leaving already," the sleepy girl mumbled. I want to visit the inn, before going to the halls of stone, he said with a smile. Finn and Puffles only looked at him with knowing eyes and a smirk, as he tried to apologize and come up with an excuse why he was gone for the whole night. Puffles stayed at the inn, as it was still absorbed in learning from its ancestral memories. Finn opted to explore the city on her own when Seth mentioned visiting the Dwarven city. Like this, Seth was alone on his way to the Golden Gates. Vathon had told him to meet at the sculptor's square on the layer of masons. The square was rather empty and he easily found the dwarf who was waving at him. Unlike his experience in the night before when he was covered in stone powder all over, he was now wearing clean clothes and his short beard seemed groomed. He was a young dwarf who worked as an apprentice for one of the sculptors in the city. It was not his first choice, but family business. He was not very skilled, which was why he would rather drink in a cheap bar among humans than spend time with fellow dwarfs his age. As one would expect, their main topic was their work and it was uncomfortable for him to take part in these conversations. He appreciated the humans who either drank in silence and liked to joke around instead of speaking about work, even when intoxicated. If I remember correctly, you want to get under the tutelage of a dwarven blacksmith master? Yes, the young dwarfs inquired. Okay. Let me think. There are about 5 masters and 7 craftsmen currently working in Aura. Do you have any preferences, like specialization, or? Actually, I am an all-rounder. I make armors, weapons, jewelry, and enchantments. Seth shrugged. Obviously, he would like a master that could guide him in every part of the field. The dwarf looked at him slightly bewildered. That is good. That only leaves one of the masters. Actually, there are 3 people who teach everything, but only one is proficient enough to teach in all of them. To systematically teach others in a class or skill, one needed to have an appropriate level themselves. They needed to be at least a craftsman, although the effect was weaker than a master's. Seth had gotten a small taste of tutelage when a blacksmith in Starta had given him advice. Seth had found out that tutelage was not simply gaining advice from a master and learning. In the system, tutelage was a passive perk that could greatly increase the proficiency gain in a skill, apart from the boost gained from an experienced master's advice. The proficiency increase was up to the journeyman rank. This was the rank when one was judged to have mastered his craft enough to go on a journey and collect more experience. Seth was already close to journeyman, the next rank after adept when it came to blacksmith, but goldsmith and enchantment could really use the boost. And just because it was only a few more levels in blacksmith, he was not ready to give up on the boost. Let's go. Master Tord has his workshop at the central plaza of the layer of Blacksmith S. I never met him, but you should be careful. I heard he is a little peculiar. But don't worry, his skills are top-notch. It's said that he has mastered blacksmith and enchantment while he is a high-level craftsman in goldsmith. They kept talking about the different master blacksmiths on their way. Besides Master Tord, there were Master Belrun and Master Aedgar. Master Belrun was specialized in goldsmith and Aedgar in enchantment. As Aura was one of the few dwarven cities that traded with the outside world, many of the current epic and higher ranked equipment the A and S ranked adventurers owned were produced by these 3 masters and the 7 craftsmen. If one ignored the lavish decoration and masonry of many of the buildings, then they all were big square pillars. The workshops of the blacksmith at the central plaza were no different. The only great difference was the shop windows. There were actually many specializations a blacksmith could follow during his career. There were shops with purely leather armor, and those with mixed and plate armor. There were shops that specialized in weapons, jewelry, or products mainly made from monster materials. All of them with variations of either enchanted or not, except for the jewelry. It was a difference between Earth's civilization and this fantasy culture. Nobody wore jewelry just for show. The enchantment was the main purpose and worth of jewelry. This is it. Vathon said as he stopped before a block. Literally. It was the only shop at the plaza without any decoration. A look through the shop window showed that the showroom was actually empty and dim. It looked like an abandoned shop, not the shop of the best master. Vathon smirked when he read Seth's expression. How could this be the shop of one of the best blacksmiths in Aura? What you are thinking, right? Master Tord only does works on order and the people have to bring him the materials. He needs no advertisements or ornaments, people know his skills, he explained. They entered the shop and stood there in dim silence. There was no clerk and sound that indicated any life in the building. No clanking of a hammer, no muffled conversation. Just stale air and silence. Vathon looked a little belated. He had never been here himself. Arim, Master Tord, the young dwarf tried to shout. Are you here? They suddenly heard surprised snoring, coughing, and a grumble as the dwarf emerged from the door behind the counter. His head was bald with a ring of sparse white hair, but his beard was long and white. The slightly messy braids with coal dust in it were tucked under his leather apron. A tiny glint of drool could be seen at the corner of his mouth, slowly soaking into the beard. Apparently, the dwarf had been sleeping in his smithy until Vadon's rude awakening. Considering that his grumpy mood was understandable. What do you want? He said in a growling, deep and unfriendly voice. Chapter 115. The Task. So, you want me to be your tutor? He glared at Seth and Vadon, these two rude invaders that had interrupted his beauty sleep. They had just explained the reason for their visit. The old blacksmith looked Seth up and down with scrutinizing eyes. Oh yeah. I almost forgot. Seth said and held out the scroll he had gotten from Venturi, the vice-master of the Adventurer Guild. Leery of Seth, the dwarf took the scroll and read it. It had the official seal of the guild and Venturi's signature. He guarantees your skill and mentioned that you were quite fast with repairs in the field. All right, I will give you a chance. Come to the back with me. You stay out, he said, pointing energetically at Vadon. Seth entered a big workshop. It was similar to his soul smithy, with all kinds of different tabled for different aspects of the job and several forges of different sizes. Master Tord even several magic power hammers. It made sense that the dwarfs, who were also known as engineers, could come up with something like this. Tord went through another fortified door and stood in the middle of a big storeroom. The shelves were filled with all kinds of materials. He grabbed a simple steel ingot and closed the door in front of Seth's nose. Here, take this and make me a simple dagger. Nothing fancy, just simple and functional. You can use my smithy or the portable one you used on the quest. I will simply watch. Seth nodded. The next moment Tord's eyes bulged when he summoned the spectral spirit smithy. This was the man Seth wanted to win as a tutor, so he would not keep this a secret. Seth put the ingot into the spirit flame and started working. Tord's POV. He usually didn't take in anyone. Every time he took in apprentices, they would soon become arrogant and haughty. Their skills grew fast under his tutelage, but unfortunately, he was not skilled enough to make them proper people. Even those he judged to have a good heart would become insufferable idiots under the influence of their environment. That's why he ended up throwing them out, each and every time. Even those he agreed to tutor would start bragging about it as if they had suddenly become a talented master. He had long lost hope in teaching anyone. The young man struck him as a little different. He did not come in flaunting his mediocre skill and talent in an attempt to impress him. God, he almost forgot to give him his references. Venturi, that old fart, actually praised him. He also complained that he talked about money during an emergency, but Tord could only judge this as a good sense for business. He decided to test this Seth's skills. Anyone who dared to look for tutelage could make a simple steel dagger, and watching him make it would tell him everything he needed to know about the young man's skills. That was what he thought, and then the young man waved his hand and summoned an illusory smithy. In a pale blue, almost white flame, that burned without smoke or fuel, the steel quickly started glowing brightly. The young man circumvented the tongs and simply grabbed the metal with his bare hand from the fire. Before the dwarven master could have doubts about the speed at which the metal heated up, the young man pulled out a big hammer. It looked like the mix of a war hammer and a smithing hammer. Was this really okay? He calmed down when Seth started forging the metal into shape. At least his motor skills were normal. He could read the experienced movements and accurate hits. Even with such a big hammer, he looked quite skilled. It fit his claim to be in the latter stages of the adept rank. But his speed was really overwhelming. It was not just that he could quickly reheat the blade in this weird fire, but he seemed to need only one hit, where others at his level might need 3 or 4. Within 15 minutes he had shaped the dagger's blade. He ground it into a more refined shape using the grinding wheel he had summoned. In another 10 minutes, he had forged a simple guard and pommel from pieces he had split off the ingot beforehand. He fit the still malleable red-hot guard snugly to the blade so it would not rattle once he assembled everything. There was nothing special about the handle, except that he did a good job with it. The last step before the assembly was heat treatment. Instead of quenching the blade in oil and normalizing it, the young blacksmith got the blade up to temperature and quenched it in the barrel of water he had summoned. Next, he sharpened the blade on the same grinding wheel and proceeded to merrily assemble the dagger. Was that all? Quenching was all he did? And he sharpened it on that simple grinding wheel? How could the dagger be sharp without using any whetstones? But when the young man came before him with a smile and handed him the dagger he made, Tord could barely believe his eyes. Sharp dagger. Common. Damage 52. Durability 100. A sharp dagger made by an aspiring blacksmith from simple materials. Plus 10% chance to cause bleeding. The description spitting in his face. Yes, the dagger was sharp, a razor to be honest, but the question was how. And that durability was also weird, for steel that was quenched in water and didn't go through a normalization cycle. He glared at Seth and then at the spirit smithy. It had to be because of this weird smithy, right? Right? This smithy seems quite unique. The old dwarf went and got another steel ingot. Can you try using my facilities instead? The second round was more or less as Tord expected. It took about double the time. The young man made no mistakes, probably because he was using blueprint, but he was obviously not used to things like giving the blade time to normalize or sharpening with whetstones. The outcome was slightly worse than his first try. Dagger. Common. Damage 40. Durability 79. A dagger made by an aspiring blacksmith from simple materials. Plus 5% chance to cause bleeding. But it was still a passable dagger. All right, I have seen enough. The young blacksmith looked up, upon Tord's words. He seemed a little nervous. I will give you a chance if you can fulfill one task. You came here with the recommendation of the guild and you entered this place by being a B-rank adventurer. You still have to prove yourself as a blacksmith. 2 weeks. I want you to open a shop like everyone else and make it successful in this time frame. Don't smile yet, I know it should not be a problem with your skill. However, I have a condition. You have to make the items you sell in this store using a normal forge and workshop. You rely too much on this spooky smithy you summoned. I admit that it has great perks, but I will teach in my facilities. So, I want you to get used to working without these perks. Do you agree? Seth thought about it. Working in a normal smithy? Maybe what Tord said was true and he did rely a little too much on the skills perks. He had felt a little embarrassed when he had to use blueprint for a simple dagger, just to know how to sharpen it on regular whetstones. He might not always be able to hide his skill if he had to. This might be a good opportunity. Tord smiled when he saw Seth nodding with a determined face. Others might have started to complain. Many actually had, as if they knew better than someone close to becoming a grandmaster blacksmith. The dwarf had become a lot more approachable after he had seen Seth work, so he finally had the chance to bring up that he mostly wanted his tutelage in goldsmith and enchantment. When Tord heard that, he was perplexed at first, but he was relieved when he heard that Seth was still an apprentice in both. He had no idea what weird quirks this spirit smithy had in those departments, and he was glad that he could have Seth learn normally instead of retraining him. When they left the smithy, they came before a dismayed Vadan. The poor guy had actually waited for several hours alone in the showroom. Seth apologized and even Tord looked a bit guilty. They both had completely forgotten the young dwarf's existence. It was past noon and Seth decided it was a great time to invite his Vadan and his soon-to-be teacher to a scrumptious meal. After all, he had learned, a dwarf's friendship deepened the more free food and alcohol you put into it. Chapter 116. Running the shop. Finn was happy that Seth would stay for another 2 weeks, instead of suddenly vanishing in those dark rabbit holes the dwarves called their home. Seth had talked to her about the idea that she could join Mina's party on quests while he was training under Tord. Finn actually agreed to this idea. She liked Mina, but it was not because of that. The fairy had set her mind on following Seth, even if he returned to his home world. For this, she needed to be stronger to level up further. She had mentioned it to Seth, but she was not sure whether Seth was aware of the difference between his home and other worlds. Earth was a lot more dangerous than other worlds. A world during its transition of the apocalypse was a lot less predictable and the beasts were a lot stronger than they would be in the already pacified worlds. This was the reason Auras were buffed. It was necessary to survive in their world. Finn needed to be strong enough to compensate for this, if she wanted to keep following Seth. Seth had a head start for his task as he already owned a shop that had gained a slight reputation thanks to the poison weapons and his recent quest. Marn was a big help in the beginning. It really reminded Seth of the time when he just started. Under Marn's guidance and the blueprint, Seth quickly got used to using a normal forge and kept making steel weapons because he did not want to waste any better material to get used to the new method. Seth also decided to abstain from using Karen's obel. It was not a big restriction, but it meant that he was unable to make the bone weapons. Being forced to use the normal forge had an unexpected advantage. Seth could continue working, while Cerberus could make more scales at the same time. Seth used this chance to have Marn teach him the elvish smithing ballads he knew. The ballads were very similar to soul infusion. One needed to sing during the forging process while infusing one's voice with mana. It was not as easy as to randomly sing-song the text. Not only needed the intonations and melody correct, but one also needed to time the song itself over the whole duration of the forging. Marn explained that it was like a conversation with the spirits and requesting them to imbue the material with their power. The half-elf only knew the most basic one that appealed to the weakest sprites of the four main elements. Their effects depended on the synergy between the elements and the material used. Earth could strengthen the durability and defense of metals, water did the same on leather and wood. This also meant that bad affinities would lead to little effect. Asking a water sprite to bestow power onto metal would normally lead to a failure. Marn explained that the ballads of the elves distinguished themselves from others because they could not only be used during forging but applied to all crafts. Marn could not help a lot, as he had little talent in this discipline, which was why he opted to look for a dwarven teacher instead of staying with his people. Seth had to depend on the blueprint skill to try and learn how to sing. Marn soon fled from the shop as demonic cacophonies left Seth's throat and made his skin crawl as if an ant had invaded his body. Seth soon stopped practicing these songs. It was to preserve Marn's sanity and because the results had spooked him. He would have understood to simply fail, but the third dagger he made. Cursed dagger. Uncommon. Damage 150. Durability, 300. One target will suffer a runny nose for 5 minutes. A cursed dagger blessed by an unknown entity who was amused by the blacksmith's singing attempts. Although his proficiency in enchantment was slightly rising, it was not worth messing with demonic power he did not know. Even if he knew them, he was not sure he wanted it. Although Seth had a lot of steel to splurge with, it did not mean that it was a cheap material. All the weapons were solidly uncommon and the shop was doing reasonably well. Still, Seth didn't like to do all this work, for so little proficiency. Instead, he decided to invest some money. He wanted to use better materials, but the current forge was not able to work with rare metals. This meant he had to purchase a better one. Just because he had to use normal equipment, didn't mean he could not upgrade. Tord workshop was really high-end. Marn was a big help in this, as he knew the fitting craftsman. But the half-elf did not come back after he left in the morning of the 4th day. In the evening, Seth had a stack of different blades on the table of the workshop. They had no handles yet, but he used the opportunity to get used to different shapes of weapons he planned to make in the future. It was now that Seth realized that his clerk went missing. Marn. Seth looked for him in his room, but he was not there. A few hours earlier, Marn left the shop to visit a mason on the surface layer of the shopping district. It was the branch of famous dwarven siblings, one was a mason and the other an engineer. They were known for their work when it came to blacksmith and masonry tools. He never bought anything himself, but he had yearned for their products. It had been his dream to own some of their products for a long time. And now Seth had told him to get good tools and facilities for the smithy, no matter the price. It was his chance. The half-elf had just entered the first underground layer when he felt a sharp pain and his eyes went dark. It was a cold torrent of water that rudely woke him up from his involuntary slumber. He was tied to a chair in a dark room, but he could make out a small shadow before him. "We meet again, Marn," the figure spoke solemnly. "Mr. J? But why?" "I paid my debt." Marn's mind was still dazed and he could only slowly form words. "That's because I asked him to." Suddenly another figure in the darkness spoke. A dim light illuminated the room and Marn was able to see who spoke. It was an elf. Clad in an expensive-looking green robe, with an arrogant expression and long pointy ears. Master Lyris, the face of the elf turned into a disgusted grimace. "I am no longer your master. You dare you! How could you turn your back on me and our craft? And to make matters worse, you went to learn from those dirt crawlers." His serious mask was lifted and he was livid. Not only did this youngling have the audacity to run away, he even stubbornly held on to his attempt to learn from one of those mineral midgets. He had paid Mr. J to make his life hell, but what happened? Not only did the debt not work, even the people that were supposed to maim him, so he would have to give up blacksmithing, kept disappearing. It had come to a point where Mr. J sent his bound sealer to simply kidnap the elf to appease the elven master's fury. Marn could only look at the man who had once kindly taught him the basics of blacksmithing with sorrowful eyes. What choice did I have? My dream was always to become a great and respected blacksmith like master. Tears started rolling down the half-elf's cheeks. Master knows that I have no talent for our ballads. No matter how well I sing or execute the ballad, the sprites only passively answer my pleas. And no higher spirit ever answered. How am I supposed to get anywhere like this? I. It simply means you are not worthy to be a blacksmith. You should have accepted it and changed your class, instead of spitting in my face like this. A disciple of Lyris ran off to rather learn from a stone smoocher. You have turned me into a joke. You are a joke. All three heard a voice from the door. Marn looked up and saw Seth's distorted figure through his tears. A not very good one at that. He threw the bound clerk into the room. His face was bloody and disfigured, but he was alive. Seth would argue that the blood was his fault, but he would argue that he looked better now than before. Marn, what are you doing? We really don't have time for this. I need that new forge. He stepped forward and started cutting the ropes that bound the surprised Marn. The other two had been stunned by the young man's sudden appearance and watched him speechlessly. What do you think you are doing? It was Lyris who had found his voice again. Taking my employee back. You elves have some weird customs for a reunion, but I don't appreciate you interrupting his work. Seth really didn't feel like getting pulled in their little sob story. He just wanted to get back home and was glad if he could fob this elvish master off without much talk. Seth had no idea how to find kidnapped people and spent the last hour running around and talking to people who might know something. The only silver lining was that elves were rather rare in Aura, so he found some clues after paying off several stall owners for information. The description of the attacker fit J.S. bound sealer, and Seth simply came here to try his luck. Who would have thought that he would crash some weird elvish drama? You dare! Do you know who I am? I am. Yet, Master Loot or whatever. I don't care. Don't approach my clerk again, got it? Seth knew that there was no sense in talking with people like this. So, he did the best he could for his own peace of mind. He tucked Marn under his arm and left, completely ignoring the huffing and puffing elf. Before he left, he turned to Mr. J and you. Don't listen to this elf anymore. If I find you messing with my shop again, I will turn everything you own to ashes. It was not a threat, but a promise. Chapter 117. Puffle's Appetite. Is this really all right? The half-elf tucked below his arm asked, as Seth left the lowest layer of the commercial district. Even with map and after having walked this way 3 times, it was hard to orient in his anthill-like maze of tunnels. Oh, sure. I think maybe you should not leave the shop when you are alone. Seth sighed. It's probably too late to order that new forge today, right? Marn blinked a few times until he understood what his employer meant. Ah, yes, I guess. Seth put the elf down when they were back in the workshop and went to the smithy to put handles on and finish the weapons. He wanted them on the shelves tomorrow. The next day he brought Finn and Puffles with him to the smithy. He had asked Finn to accompany Marn on his way to the dwarven shop. She also urged him to show her his shop. Although the front was unimpressive, she complimented him on the interior and the appearance of his clerk. This made Marn, the clerk in question, blush wildly. Puffles on the other hand had asked to accompany Seth to his workshop. The Eyevisor had suddenly stopped his meditation and asked to watch him work. He had often watched Seth making items, while they were on the airship. Maybe he was interested to see the difference when he worked in a normal smithy? Seth started working after the fairy and the elf left and Puffles sat on a table in the back. He had just finished a blade when he heard an odd clatter in the background. It was different from Cerberus punching scales. When he turned around, he saw the small Eyevisor rummaging in the pile scraps that were left from the golem's work. What are you looking for? The Eyevisor flinched when he heard Seth asking from behind. He had been caught. QQQ the great me has nothing to hide. No. I simply inspected the quality of your materials. Yes. I see. Nothing to hide. Then Seth bowed down and picked up one of the scraps. Why is there a bite mark on this? QQQ. I have no idea. Come on Puffles, the mighty, he said and picked him up from the ground. The Eyevisor had grown quite a lot now and it was hard to simply cradle him like back then. You can tell me very thing. Are we not partners? I want to help you. I can help you if you don't tell me. Come on, tell me. Let me help you, he kept whispering to the young Eyevisor. Q. Q. All right, the mighty me shall allow you to help me. I need specific metals for my development, but I simply can't find them in your shop. I tried tasting some, but they are not the right stuff. You want to eat other materials? Does that mean you can make threads from different materials? Seth guessed immediately. Puffles had tried to hide this, since he knew that Seth would start to stuff him with materials again, to get even more thread. There was nothing bad about this, but making thread all day long was really boring. He was a great eye-visor, a divine being. It did not seem right that he had to spend his time making materials for a blacksmith, even if he was his partner. He could no longer withstand Seth's stare and nodded. That's great. Let us try the ones I have with me first. Seth actually had not that many metals in his possession. There was gold, silver, high-quality steel, ancient bronze, dark steel, and a pinky-size piece of mithril. Seth was still looking into his inventory to see whether he had picked up any other metals. When he looked back on the table, the little stick of mithril was missing. Didn't I already take out the mithril? He looked back in his inventory, but could not find it. Then he heard the nibble. On the ground was Puffles, and he looked just in time to see the rest of his mithril vanish into the eye-visor's mouth. He was about to get angry, when he remembered that he was able to simply buy more here in Aura. Well, simply as in, for a lot of money. Qoo. I am sorry. I couldn't stop myself. It's similar to how you react to sweets. He sighed. At least we already found one thing you want to eat. How many do you need? Is it like ancient bronze, or is it an alloy with more components? The caterpillar thought for a moment. QQQ. 3. Then we could go shopping, he suggested. They closed shop and left. The material market had its own square in the commercial district. Surrounding the square were specialized shops where you could order specific material in all kinds of quantities. Unfortunately, few of these were not fit for window shopping where you could see a lot of different things. So instead, they entered the market, a kind of bazaar. Here anyone could open a stall for a small fee and sell anything that could be judged as material. Most of the people here were adventurers selling monster products like bones, scales, and organs. But they often also had weird minerals or rocks and drops from monsters like stone giants. Seeing the chaotic scenes of stalls that ranged from actual structures to simple blankets on the ground, Seth had a bad premonition. Puff. If you want something, tell me. Don't. I repeat, don't just eat something without telling me. Did you understand? He told the big caterpillar with a menacing aura. Puffles could only nod. They had crossed about half the bazaar when the eye-visor suddenly stopped. It was a blanket filled with all kinds of rocks or ores that showed some sparkling inclusions. Puffles stopped there as if spellbound by this rock. Seth actually recalled it into the pet space so it wouldn't swallow the stone without warning. Hehe. You pet seemed quite interested in my wares, the street vendor said with a crafty smile. Seth had a feeling that this stone would not be cheap. He looked at the stone with Blacksmith's eyes. Cernum ore, crafting material, rare. The ore of Cernum, a golden metal that has a good affinity with light and fire. Often called the sun gold, it can lead to mysterious effects when used in jewelry. Can be refined to Cernum. Similar to gold, it was a soft material fit for jewelry. How much? He asked out of politeness. If it was too much he would. 2 gold, hehe, the vendor said, rubbing his hand. Have a nice day, he said, and simply left. It was a good thing he was able to stop the eye-visor from simply swallowing that ore. Even if it was rated rare, 2 gold for a barely fist-sized piece of ore was way too much. Ah. Hey, wait. This is a really good deal. This ore is very rare, you know? You probably won't find any more of it anywhere on this bazaar, the man called out to him. Oh really? Then how about I go to one of the stores and ask for Cernum? Are you saying they won't have any? Seth asked, interested. Maybe the man was saying the truth. I explained why they had looked through half the bazaar without finding anything. In Seth's opinion, there were 2 reasons why there was no Cernum on the market. Yes, it might be so rare that few people sold it. Or it was so plentiful and cheap that people did not bother selling it in a stall. They could simply sell it to the stores and save their time. Judging by the heavy sweat on the man's forehead when he mentioned the actual name of the metal, it was the latter. At least, the vendor was not telling the whole truth, that was for sure. NGHOOK. 20 silver, the vendor said begrudgingly. This was a 90% decrease. 10 silver. No more. Seth said mercilessly. The man almost started crying but accepted the trade. Who would believe his poor act? This man had probably still made a profit. Here. Seth gave the piece of ore to the eye-visor after summoning it again. The caterpillar greedily gobbled it up. After confirming that this was the second of 3 ingredients, they kept going. They hoped to find the third ingredient, too. They had searched the whole market, but they were out of luck. Puffles had not found the third material, yet. They were still not out of options, they could still take a look at the stores in the vicinity. Although only a few displayed the materials, Seth had to visit them anyways to ask for mithril and cernum. The latter was not as rare and cheap as Seth had expected, but it was far from the price of the mithril. They started window shopping in the different shops and asked to see samples. Some shops would not, but many did actually have a small collection of samples to show to customers. It was a measure they implemented especially for a blacksmith that looked for fitting materials. As expected from a place that valued blacksmiths highly. It was the 7th shop when Puffles finally reacted. It was not one of the samples shown to them, but a reddish stone in a tray on the counter that caught the eye-visor's attention. Dusk ore, crafting material, uncommon. The ore of the dusk iron. An extremely hard and brittle metal that is hard to refine because of its high melting point. Can be refined to dusk iron. Do you sell this, too? Dusk iron? Seth asked curiously, pointing at the stone. Oh, that, no, the owner said with an embarrassed laugh. It's not very sought after and hard to refine, so we don't have a regular stock of it. This was sold by a customer this morning. As if he saw a chance to get rid of a dead article, he continued talking. Are you interested? It's not much, but I have another box in the back. If you take it all, I can give you a good price. Seth agreed and got a whole box of 20 more or less fist-sized rocks for the paltry sum of 1 silver. It was really dirt cheap for an uncommon material. This gave Seth an idea. As they kept looking for the cheapest price for mithril, he also kept asking for the dusk iron and was able to collect 2 whole stacks of dusk ore for less than he had paid for the cernum ore. Before they left the market, Seth bought 20 ingots of each of the others, paying a whopping 80 gold for the mithril and 18 gold for the cernum. These bars were each big enough to make a short sword out of, and Seth really hoped the eye-visor would not need to eat all of it. Chapter 118. Celestial Bronze. Underscore 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 un. Marn and Finn had already returned when they came back to the workshop. One of the advantages of a world where everyone has an inventory was that one did not need to wait for deliveries. As long as it was judged as one object, it could be stored. It was as if you could buy a washing machine and bring it back home in your pocket. The whole smithy was already completely upgraded. A new forge, a power hammer, exchangeable grinding wheels. Everything a blacksmith would need to make high-end weapons and armor. The fairy and the elf had really no mercy on his wallet. He really couldn't complain, he was Mr. Moneybags after all. Funny enough, they used less money than him. They met the two joking together at the counter when they entered the shop. It seemed like Mr. J listened to his advice since Finn had not much to do besides keeping Marn company. They did not have much time to talk as the caterpillar kept bouncing around him. QQQ. The eye-visor was excited and urged him to bring out the material. Seth brought out a bar fo mithril, cernum, and a dusk ore, but the eye-visor did not eat. Cure. These two are refined, that one is not. I am not going to accept this uncooked food. Refine it for me. He could only sigh. The little brat would not let him off if he didn't do it right now. Dusk iron was allegedly hard to refine, this might be interesting. He belatedly excused himself and went to the spirit furnace. He had only agreed to not use it for the shop, this was not for the shop, so he would obviously use any cheats he could get. With antsy Puffles behind him, Seth put several rocks of the dusk ore into the smelter and started controlling the flame. Now he just waited for the ore to melt. He waited for the ore. For the ore to melt. Melt? The ore was glowing red but did not melt. Until now it never mattered what metal he put into the furnace, it would always melt in a matter of minutes. Seth took full control of the fire and started to increase its power. Sweat covered his forehead as he used mental force to increase the temperature. Finally, as if a thin membrane ripped, small droplets of liquid metal leaked out and it formed a pool with the slag floating on top. The ore ingots strongly varied in size, so Seth concluded that he needed 4 or 5 rocks for 2 ingots. If his stamina and mental strength held up, he could make about 40 dusk iron ingots. Hey, just another 20 more times. It really warmed his heart seeing the greedy Ivisor immediately gobbling up the fruit of his hard labor. Not this unthankful little. But he wanted to see the new material, so Seth could only keep on pouring sweat and tears into working the furnace. Ding! Skill, Fire Affection 3 has become Fire Affection 4. At least it was not without gains. Working so intensely with the fire increased his fire affection again. It lessened the burden a little bit, but Seth felt his energy dwindling. It was salvation, when Puffles, who had been nibbling away at the fresh ingot, told him after 10 ingots that he had enough for now. Seth worried a little that his fire manipulation would still not level up. But the 9th level was always the hardest. Entranced, Finn and Marn joined Seth in watching the caterpillar devour the refined metal ingots. After eating the 10 ingots of dusk iron, 2 ingots of mithril and 5 ingots of cernum, Puffles stopped moving for a while, and then a bright golden thread emerged from his mandibles. It didn't end there, the Ivisor started to wrap it around himself. Wait, he was going to pupate. Completely spellbound sat the 3 people, a fairy, an elf, and a human, there and watched a caterpillar turn into a cocoon of bright, silver golden thread. It became late evening when Puffles was finally finished and turned into a cocoon. Are you okay, Puff? Don't talk to me. Will enter my first transition. I will talk to you once I'm done. Seth nodded. He finally remembered and used his blacksmith's eyes on the cocoon. Celestial bronze, crafting material, rare. A mysterious material created by a divine beast. It rivals mithril in strength and is on par with it in magic conductivity. It excels in durability and tensile strength. It has a great affinity with fire and light. Celestial bronze? It really had almost perfectly combined the traits of the different parts of the alloy. Seth had not messed around a lot with alloys, but from what he heard, it was actually very hard to harmonize many different metals and minerals in a way to create an alloy that is better than the individual ingredients. Blacksmith's eyes judged it as rare. Would it be epic for Natal? He hoped the old man would not die from a heart attack once he saw it. After checking the new material, Seth put the cocoon into the pet space. Now he had finally time to test the new furnace. Or not, it was already late. To end the day, he invited Marn to eat out with him and Finn. The next day Seth could finally start working with the super material mithril. Everyone knew how strong it was and it had one of the highest magic conductivities there were. Mithril would not only help him in blacksmith but also in enchantment. Even so, he made uncommon enchanted steel weapons. They gave almost no experience since iron was not a good medium for magic. He couldn't get much proficiency with the basic enchantments he could use. But he had qualms about using pure mithril. It was a really expensive material and what was he thinking? This was all to level his skill, not to make more money. The money came in anyway. 1 ingot was enough to make a short sword or 2 normal daggers. As long as he didn't fail, they were guaranteed to be rare if he made it from pure mithril. He wanted to use this, and instead of making 2 more traditional daggers, he opted to make stiletto daggers. This was not a blueprint the system had given him, but Seth had originally designed this blueprint. He wanted to make a few of them from snake teeth. Unfortunately, the material was not strong enough to make a good stiletto, but mithril was different. This weapon shape enabled him to make 3 rare weapons from 1 ingot. He was only able to use 1 basic enchantment per weapon, to begin with. A stiletto had enough space for that. Seth would have made the handles from high-quality steel if he had been using the spirit smithy, but like this, he went with a handle carved from the snake teeth and the small crossguard and pommel from steel. Despite the new furnace, working a rare material gave Seth a hard time. Stilettos had a thin blade specialized in stabbing. He had expected that it would be easier than the broader dagger shapes, but it felt actually harder to control the movement of the metal when the goal was a very thin blade. He heaved a big sigh of relief when he finished the first stiletto and gained almost 5% proficiency. It was already late afternoon when he looked at the clock. Mithril stiletto. Rare. Damage 590. Durability 1700. An intriguing dagger made by an aspiring blacksmith. The peculiar shape doubles the damage on stabbing attacks but halves the damage of slashes. The damage values rivaled the loyal spear and the durability was also recommendable. What kind of enchantment would fit this the best? A bright silver stiletto with a white bony handle and darker steel elements. As he looked through the catalogue of simple enchantments, he could make his eyes fell on the elemental damages. Elemental damage was a simple circuit that turned the channeled mana into a magical attack of a specific element. The one Seth chose was one of the enchantments he had recently gotten on their journey. Lighting damage. It was an enchantment that did a certain amount of electrical damage to the target and had a chance to paralyze or even stun. Paralysis and stun seemed appropriate for an assassin's weapon. Another enchantment that fit such a bright metal was frost damage. It could also slow and freeze the opponent. Seth didn't really have to choose between the two, he could just make a few of each and see how they sold. The time flew by and he just didn't expect how big of a buff the increased production speed from his spirit smithy was. It became evening before he finally finished the enchantment. He needed one full day to make this one stiletto. In one day, he only gained 5% in his blacksmith and 11% in his enchantment. Other blacksmiths would feel accomplished to make a rare weapon in one day, but to Seth, it felt agonizingly slow. Still, he would not break his promise to Tord. He was looking forward to tomorrow when this new dagger entered the shop. Stunning stiletto. Rare. Damage 590. Durability 1700. 120 lightning damage on target mana cost, 10/S. An intriguing dagger made by an aspiring blacksmith. The peculiar shape doubles the damage on stabbing attacks but halves the damage of slashes. The lightning damage has 25% chance to cause partial paralysis and 5% to cause stun or full paralysis. Chapter 119. Running business. The mithril stiletto was the final straw. Their shop had a good reputation from the poison weapons and the consistent quality of the other weapons he and Marn made. Seth's action during the quest also brought in a lot of potential patrons. With the news of a rare dagger making the round, they got a lot more influx in their shop and also more wealthy figures. One had to admit that the location of their shop was bad, so much it could not be worse. Having people come to this place to look for weapons was not short of a miracle. But why would they come down there when the shops on the surface and in the upper layer also often sold rare weapons? One had to know that many of these adventurers understood what happened in Aura. Many young blacksmiths came here looking for the teachings of the dwarven craftsmen and masters. Many opted to sell their weapons through the established shops and make a deficit to gain recognition. A blacksmith who rather opted to open an own shop, even in the second layer, was recommendable, but not enough for a lot of higher-ranked adventurers to visit it. This changed when Seth started to manufacture rare-rated weapons. A rare-rated weapon was a good weapon for a B-rank adventurer and the dream of any C-rank adventurer. It was not only the rank that made people come to take a look, getting to know a young and talented blacksmith was always a good investment for the future. Another aspect that pulled in the masses was the price. Seth had seen the prices for similar weapons in the other shops when he tried to find a place to sell his weapons for him. He only spent a day on making the stiletto and had no qualms about mercilessly undercut their prices. With 10 gold for one stiletto, he asked for approximately 10 times the material cost and was still cheaper than the professional stores. The real success was not selling the stiletto and other weapons but pulling in customers. Some B-ranks approached Seth to commission weapons after seeing the delicate stiletto. Most of them were thieves or assassins looking for a new dagger, but some others like archers also came looking for short swords as secondary weapons. Marn and Finn were staffing the counter. While Marn was dealing with the customer, Finn lazily watching the hubbub. Seth was working on making the third stiletto and only met some customers. Those who wanted to order customized weapons. This was the real sign of a successful shop, customer paying him money to make weapons to order. Seth had little experience with customers, but by now he had worked long enough with weapons and had held a huge variety in his hands, that the basic knowledge had stuck with him. 2 short swords were never the same. For a customer, he had to take into account the size of their hands, their strength, their preference in fighting style, weight, balance, and weapon length. He knew the basics, but Seth was nowhere near a master who could simply look at a person and their hand and accurately judge what weapon they needed. That's why he only spoke with few customers, as each one took 20 minutes to half an hour of his time to specify the weapons they wanted and needed. He diligently made notes for every weapon, so he would not forget later. One thing he was glad about was that not everyone wanted mithril weapons. Some specifically asked for steel stilettos. The weapon design itself was a huge hit with many adventurers. It didn't just look stylish but offered increased stabbing damage without completely losing the option of slashing like some spikes or armor-piercing daggers did. At the end of the second day after introducing the mithril stiletto, they had sold 2 stilettos, 1 frost, 1 lighting, and had 15 commissions for more weapons. 7 of them were asking for steel stilettos, 3 for mithril daggers, and the other 5 were a mix of orders for different weapons. They had only a little more than a week and Seth was sure this was enough. Not just that, it might actually a little too much to finish alone in the rest of the time. This was when Seth asked himself the question, why should he do it alone? "Oh Marn, how about we close shop for a few days and you help me with this," he said with an alluring smile. He had an employee who was also a blacksmith, why would he suffer alone? The next few days they closed the shop and Marn helped Seth finish the uncommon weapons made from steel. Using high-quality steel, Seth was able to finish the 7 stiletto blades in one day, and half-elf started making crossguard and pommels on the smaller forge. Afterward, Seth started working on the mithril stilettos, while Marn worked on assembling the handles. It was really busy in the smithy with both men sweating and working intensely. Finn had watched the spectacle for some time, but it became too hot in the smithy for her in more than one way. 2 half-naked muscular men swinging their hammers together in sync was a sight that soon attracted Mina, who had recently returned from a quest. Finn graciously took it upon herself and led the drooling cat girl away from the tempting display of masculinity. It was definitely not because the fairy was bored without Puffles and thought she could have some fun going around with Mina. While the 2 girls hit it off with each other, the 2 men didn't even notice they were gone. There was a satisfied smile on Marn's lips. Just working in the smithy without worrying about money or expectations in him. This was all he had ever wanted. The 2 continued this routine. On the 3rd day, having the shop closed, when Marn had finished the 7 steel stilettos and Seth finished 2 mithril blades, they started with the other 5 weapons. Namely, there were 2 mithril short swords, a stiletto from dark steel and 2 mithril spears. While Seth got onto making the blades, Marn was left with finishing the shafts and handles. Seth first made the spear tips, as they did not take too long, and then went to make the stiletto from dark steel. Even so, this was also a rare material, it was a lot easier to forge than mithril. It made him once again realize that there were differences even in the same rank, it was just not displayed by most system skills. The appraisal from the old man at the auction house was able to judge a material's status within its rank. On the 4th day after closing shop, they were mostly finished and reopened. Marn stayed at the counter while Seth finished up the weapons. By making the weapons in tandem, the proficiency was shared, similar to the experience in a party. Seth still got a whopping 35% proficiency and was now only missing about 20% to reach Level 9. The proficiency of enchantment, on the other hand, was not shared, and he slowly got better in engraving, which increased his experience even more. In the end, after finishing everything, his skill leveled up and he stopped at enchantment, beginner, Level 9, 43%. Seth was now really close to rank up. The information that their shop opened again spread fast, as soon customers flooded in and some people came to ask for their order. The shop was busy and the atmosphere was good, as those who came for the weapons, they ordered, left the shop with a sparkling new weapon and a satisfied smile, for all other customers to see. Seth was happy, too. Just a few more days and he could seriously learn skills from Master Tord. He almost expected something terrible to happen, but nothing did. The 2 weeks ended on a good note and Seth got ready to visit Master Tord again. Chapter 120. Visiting Nadal. His mood was already good when he was eating together with Finn at the inn. Today he wanted to go to Master Tord and give him the final report on the shop. But before he could leave, he met a messenger in the lobby. Nadal had sent him a message that he was done with his orders. He asked the fairy to stay here since he wanted to surprise her with the robe once he had enchanted it with soul infusion. He was also looking forward to what Nadal was able to make from the wyvern leather. "It's good to see you again, Seth." Nadal greeted him when he entered his workshop. "Hello, Nadal. How are you?" he asked and sat down on one of the chairs in the room. "Good, good. Better lately, since you bring me such great materials." He smiled gently and brought out 4 packages. "4? You finished these really fast, didn't you?" It had been maybe 2 weeks since he had bought Nadal the materials. "Haha, yes. Let me show you. Let's start with the robe for your quarter-elven friend." Now Seth remembered why it was for. After he told Lixis to visit this shop, he had actually forgotten about it. He thought she would get the robe herself. The robe was golden through and through with a dark blue fabric lining the inside. Nadal explained that the lining was weaved from the wool of midnight sheep. It had a natural property to weaken one's presence. A great perk for any mage. Similar to his jacket, the robe had the effect to lighten itself and strengthen its defense. Seth decided to give it to her later when he finished everyone's equipment. Next was Finn's new robe. It was not a traditional robe like priests usually wore but was more like a suit martial artists were often seen wearing. It was made up of pants, a jacket, and a belt. The outside was gold while the inside was lined with thin wyvern leather. Seth could imagine the fairy, wearing this golden robe and surrounded by her divine aura. She would like one of the characters from a cartoon he watched as a child, Dragon Cubes. She would become Super Syaphon. Unable to wipe his grin off his face, Seth urged the old tailor to show him what he did for him. Nadal saw how happy Seth was about the fairy's equipment and moved on to the set of shirts and pants he did for him. When Nadal had said he would need to use some of the ancient bronze to have enough material to make the shirt and pants, Seth had expected a normal kind of leather shirt and pants with gold accents. What Nadal did was to intricately weave or sew together stripes of the golden cloth and the wyvern leather. The leather he had dyed a deep dark red while the golden stripes almost looked like embroidery, forming a stark contrast between each other. The inside was lined with a soft dark fabric. I know, the color scheme might not be to everyone's taste, but I guarantee you, that the effects are good. If you find an enchanter, the natural effects could also be strengthened further. Nadal's shirt. Rare. Set item 1/2. Physical DEF 250. Mag DEF 50. Durability 1800. 1 Strength and defense by 50% for 10's mana cost 70. 2 Weight of the armor is halved, no cost. 3 5% increase in movement speed. This extraordinary piece of clothing is part of a set made by the tailor craftsman Nadal. It had a high affinity to wine thanks to the materials used. Set effect, 35% increase in defense, 10% increase in movement speed. Nadal's pants. Rare. Set item 1/2. Physical DEF 150. Mag DEF 35. Durability 1500. 1 Strength and defense by 50% for 10's mana cost 70. 2 Weight of the armor is halved, no cost. 3 10% increase in movement speed. This extraordinary piece of clothing is part of a set made by the tailor craftsman Nadal. It had a high affinity to wine thanks to the materials used. Set effect, 35% increase in defense, 10% increase in movement speed. Set items. The pieces were already great on their own, but he would even get a bonus when he wore them both. And that without any kind of enchantments. Nadal was really a master of his craft. Even so, he was still a craftsman. Not just increased defense, but if he wore both he would have 25% more movement speed. He would be able to run like the wind. Try them on. I have to make sure they fit correctly, the old man encourages him. Seth didn't make him wait and equip the new clothes instead of his casual attire. He could not just feel that the clothes were light, but he felt his whole body lighten when he put them on. Was this the effect of increased moment speed? It felt as if a weight that was pushing down on him was slightly lifted. He started to nimbly jog and run, back and forth in the workshop, and Nadal observed him see whether there were problems in his work. He happily nodded as he watched Seth joyfully jump around and could not see any problems. I'm really glad to have met you, Nadal, Seth said, a little exhausted after he tried his new equipment. As thanks, I will give you something to look forward to, he continued, and brought out Puffles in his cocoon. The old tailor's eyes shot open wide and his jaw almost touched the ground. He shuffled close to get a good look, but didn't dare to touch the cocoon. Oh, my goodness! Was all he could say at this moment. Seth stood widely grinning beside him. It was a good thing Nadal didn't get a heart attack. He gave the man some time to deal with the situation before asking. So, what rating do you see it as? I see it as rare, and you? Epic, definitely epic. A master might even be able to make something legendary from this thread. Just where did you get this? Seth pondered for a while but decided to trust the old tailor. He put Puffles back into the pet space and told Nadal his story. Not the full one, but enough for the old man to understand what the eye visor was and how it made the thread. Seth didn't know how much longer he would stay in the world of Nemea or when Puffles would wake up, but he made a deal with Nadal, that before he left, he would bring the old man all the thread Puffles had made until then and let him make something from it. Seth stayed with Nadal for lunch. In the afternoon he could finally make his way to the Halls of Stone. He knew the way thanks to the map and soon arrived before Master Tort's building. He had come here a week earlier to give him a status report. This time he came because his task was finished.